Those men are already gone. I am not throwing away another aircraft chasing ghosts in a canyon. General Aldous Prescott said it without blinking. 11 American soldiers were bleeding out in a canyon on the other side of the world, surrounded, out of time, and this man had just crossed them off like numbers on a page. 3 pilots had already refused. The map said impossible. The general said dead, and every officer in that command center went silent because it was over. Then a voice spoke up from the back of the room. With respect, sir, nobody's flown that canyon the right way yet. Her name was Major Evelyn Carter, and she was about to prove them all wrong. Before we go any further, if you believe that no soldier should ever be left behind, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And in the comments, tell me the city you are watching from tonight so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. It was 2:18 in the morning when the alarm cut through the quiet of the operations center at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Most of the building was asleep. Coffee had gone cold in a dozen paper cups. And then, in a single breath, everything changed. A radio call came screaming through the speakers, broken and distorted, but the words were clear enough to freeze the blood of everyone who heard them. We are surrounded. We have wounded. Our exit is blocked. Requesting immediate air support. Please, someone respond. Colonel Michael Reynolds was on his feet before the message finished. He grabbed the nearest headset and leaned over the console. Say again your position. Say again. The voice that came back was young, too young, and it was shaking. This is Sergeant Doyle, Rescue Element Bravo. We had 11 souls. We are down to 9 who can still move. The other 2 are hurt bad. The enemy has the high ground on both sides. We can't climb out and we can't go forward. We are stuck at the bottom of this canyon and they are closing in. Reynolds closed his eyes for just a second. Then he opened them and started barking orders. I want eyes on that canyon. I want a map on the main screen. I want every asset in the region and I want it now. Officers scrambled. Screens flickered to life. And there it was, glowing in the dark, a thin, crooked scar cut through the mountains of Afghanistan. A canyon so narrow it looked like a knife wound in the earth. Everyone in the room stared at it, and everyone in the room understood the problem at the same moment. That's a box, one of the intelligence officers said quietly. There's no way in and no way out except straight down the middle. Reynolds turned to the wall where 3 pilots were already gathering, pulling on their gear, ready to fly the moment they were told. These were experienced men, combat hours, medals, nerves of steel, and Reynolds trusted every one of them with his life. Study it, he told them. Give me a way to help those men. I don't care how ugly it is. Find me an approach. The first pilot stepped up to the screen. His name was Captain Harris, and he had flown more missions than most men had flown hours. He traced the shape of the canyon with his finger, following the twists, the sudden turns, the cliffs that rose almost straight up on either side. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he lowered his hand and shook his head. Sir, I want to help those men more than anything. But an aircraft that goes in there at attack speed has no room to maneuver. The walls are too close. One bank of the wings and you clip a mountain. We'd be a smoking hole before we ever fired a shot. Reynolds felt his jaw tighten. Next, the second pilot took his place. Major Ellison, a careful man, a smart man, the kind of pilot who came home because he never gambled with numbers he couldn't beat. He studied the terrain even longer than Harris had. He ran the angles in his head. He measured the drop. And when he finally turned around, his face was pale. Colonel, I've done low approaches. I've flown things that would give most men nightmares. But this isn't brave. This is suicide. If I take a jet in there, I don't come out the other side, and neither do those soldiers, because now they've got a wreck on top of them and the enemy still standing. Next, Reynolds said, and there was an edge in his voice now that hadn't been there before. The third pilot didn't even walk all the way to the screen. He looked at the map from across the room and shook his head. Same answer, sir. No aircraft can safely fly that low. Not through that. I'm sorry, I truly am. And that was when the silence fell. The worst kind of silence. The silence of a room full of people who all knew what they were about to lose. Somewhere on the other side of that map, a radio crackled again, and the young sergeant's voice came through, thinner now, more afraid. Command! Are you still there? Please tell me you're still there. Reynolds pressed the transmit button and forced steadiness into his voice. We're here, Bravo. We are working the problem. Hold what you've got. They're moving on us, sir, Doyle said. I can hear them on the ridge. I can hear them getting closer. My guys are asking me if help is coming, and I don't know what to tell them. Reynolds had no answer, and a commander with no answer is the loneliest man alive. That was the moment General Aldous Prescott walked into the room. He had been pulled from his quarters, and he did not look happy about it. He was a tall man, silver at the temples, with the kind of calm that came from years of making decisions that other people had to live with. He listened for exactly 90 seconds. He looked at the map. He looked at the three pilots who had already said no. And then he made his own decision, the same way he made all of them, cold and fast and final. We're not sending anyone into that canyon, Prescott said. The terrain doesn't allow it. 3 of my best just told you the same thing. Those men on the ground fought hard, and God bless them for it, but I am not going to lose an aircraft and a 4th pilot on a mission that physics itself says is impossible. He turned to leave. Prepare a statement. We'll notify the families in the morning. And that was when a voice spoke up from the back of the room. Quiet, steady, not loud, but somehow it stopped the general cold. With respect, sir, nobody's flown that canyon the right way yet. Every head turned. Standing near the door, still in her flight suit, was Major Evelyn Carter, 35 years old, thousands of combat hours, and a A-10 pilot with a reputation that split every room she walked into. Some people called her the best close air support pilot on the base. Others called her reckless, too aggressive, a woman who pushed her aircraft closer to the edge than any sane person should. But nobody, not one single person, had ever called her a coward. Prescott studied her for a moment. And who are you? Major Carter, sir. A-10 Thunderbolt. Major Carter. Prescott repeated the name slowly, the way a man repeats something he intends to remember. You heard 3 pilots with more combat time than you tell me it can't be done. And you want to argue with them? No, sir, Evelyn said. I don't want to argue with them at all. They're right. It can't be done the way they were planning to do it. They were looking at it like a fighter jet approach. High and fast, roll in, dive down, pull out. In that canyon, that gets you killed. I agree with every word they said. Prescott's eyebrows rose slightly. Then we're finished here. No, sir, we're not. Evelyn stepped forward, and now she was walking toward the screen, and the whole room was watching her the way you watch someone walk out onto thin ice. There's another way to fly it, and I fly the one aircraft in the entire inventory that was built to do exactly this. Colonel Reynolds crossed his arms. He knew Carter. He'd flown with her. And a small, dangerous hope was starting to burn in his chest, the kind of hope a commander doesn't dare say out loud. Talk to me, Major. Evelyn put her finger on the mouth of the canyon. The 3 pilots who looked at this were thinking about altitude. They were thinking, how low can I dive before I have to pull up? And they're right, at those speeds, in that space, there's no room to recover. But the A-10 doesn't have to dive into it. The A-10 can crawl into it. Terrain following. I go in low from the very start, not diving down into the canyon, but flying along the floor of it, right above the ground, matching every curve, hugging the earth the whole way through. The intelligence officer leaned forward. How low are we talking? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Low enough that if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter how low I say. Nobody laughed, because they all understood exactly what she meant. That's insane, Major Ellison said, but there was something different in his voice now. Not dismissal, something closer to awe. You're talking about flying between the walls, not over them, between them. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Evelyn said. The Warthog was built ugly and slow on purpose. It was built to get down in the dirt with the guys on the ground. It's got a titanium bathtub around the cockpit. It can take hits that would knock any of your jets out of the sky, and it carries a cannon that fires rounds the size of milk bottles. That's not a fighter, sir. That's a flying rescue that happens to shoot back. And right now there are 9 men in a hole in the ground who need exactly that. Prescott had not moved. He was watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. And if you clip a wall, Major, if you're off by 10 feet in the dark, in a canyon, at low altitude, with no room to correct, then I don't come home, Evelyn said simply. But sir, if I don't go, those men don't come home either. And the difference between me and them is that I get a choice. They don't. They're just waiting. The room was silent again, but it was a different silence now. Prescott turned away from her and walked slowly toward the map, And for a long moment, he just looked at that thin, cruel line in the mountains. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Sit down, Major, all of you. I need 1 minute." Evelyn didn't sit. She stood exactly where she was, and she waited. And inside her chest, her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the whole room could hear it. Because she had said the brave thing, the thing that needed saying, but that didn't mean she wasn't afraid. She was terrified. Any pilot who tells you they're not afraid of a canyon in the dark is either lying to you or lying to themselves. But there was something Evelyn Carter had learned a long time ago, something that had shaped every single day of her career, and it was this: fear is not the enemy. Fear is just the price you pay for caring about the outcome. And she cared about those 9 men more than she cared about her own fear. While Prescott studied the map, the radio came alive again. This time the voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. "Command, this is Doyle. We just lost our cover on the north side. They're going to enemy on top of us inside the hour. I've got 2 men who can't walk. I'm not leaving them. So whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now or don't do it at all." Reynolds reached for the transmitter, but Evelyn spoke first, and everyone let her. She leaned toward the console and pressed the button, and when she spoke, her voice was completely calm. "Sergeant Doyle, this is Major Carter. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to leave anyone. Do you understand me? Nobody in that canyon is getting left behind tonight. You hold your position, you keep your wounded close, and you keep your head down, because I am coming to you." There was a pause on the radio, and then the young sergeant's voice came back, and it cracked on the first word. "Ma'am, are you a pilot?" "I am," Evelyn said. "Can you actually get in here?" And Evelyn Carter looked up at that map, at the mountains that 3 good pilots and 1 general had all said were impossible, and she gave the only answer she had ever known how to give. "I am going to get in there, Sergeant, and I am going to get you out. You have my word." She let go of the button, and when she looked up, General Prescott was staring at her. He had heard every word. For a long moment, the general said nothing at all, and then slowly he walked back to the center of the room and he stopped in front of Major Carter, and he looked at her the way a man looks at someone he is about to gamble everything on. "You just made a promise to that boy," Prescott said. "On my radio, in my command center. You understand that if I let you go and you don't come back, that promise is on me for the rest of my life?" "Yes, sir," Evelyn said. "I understand that completely. And you understand that I have 3 pilots standing right here who told me this can't be done. Men I've trusted for years." "Yes, sir." "So tell me, Major Carter." Prescott's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Why should I believe you can do the one thing that 3 of my best just swore was impossible?" And here is where the whole thing turned, because Evelyn did not answer with courage. She did not answer with pride. She answered with a story that nobody in that room had ever heard. And when she finished, the argument was over. "Sir," she said quietly, 9 years ago I was a young lieutenant, and I was in a convoy that got ambushed in a valley not so different from that one. We were pinned, we had wounded, and we called for help, just like Doyle is calling right now. And do you know what happened?" She paused, and for the first time her calm slipped, just a little, just enough to show the room what was underneath it. A pilot came, a pilot who was told it was too dangerous, a pilot who came anyway, and he flew so low over our position that I could see the number painted under his wing. He stayed until the last vehicle was clear, and then he flew home on fumes. I never met him, I never learned his name, but I climbed out of that valley alive because one person decided that dangerous was not the same thing as impossible. The room was dead silent. "I became a pilot because of that man, sir. I chose the A-10 because of that man. And every single day since, I have carried one promise in my chest, that if I was ever the one flying, and there were people on the ground calling for help, and everyone else said it couldn't be done, I would not do to them what could have been done to me. I would not leave them in the valley." She lifted her chin. "So you ask me why you should believe me. That's why, because I have been Sergeant Doyle. I have been at the bottom of the hole, listening to the radio, praying that somebody, anybody, would come. And somebody did. Tonight it's my turn to be the one who comes." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even General Aldous Prescott, a man who had spent 30 years learning how to say no, stood there with something working behind his eyes. And then Captain Harris, the first pilot who had refused, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, I said it couldn't be done, and flying it the way I was thinking, it can't. But she's not wrong about the Warthog. If anyone alive can do it, it's a low pilot in that airframe. I'd stake my reputation on it. He looked at Evelyn, and there was respect there now, hard-earned. I'll help her plan the route myself. Major Ellison nodded slowly. Same, I'll run the terrain data. Every curve, every elevation change. If she's going in knowing every inch of that canyon before her wheels leave the ground. Prescott looked around the room at the men who had told him no and were now offering to help send someone else into the thing they had refused. And something in his face shifted. He turned back to Evelyn. You listen to me, Major, he said, and you listen good. I am not sending you in there to die a hero. I have enough dead heroes. I am sending you in there to bring 9 men home and to bring yourself home too. Both. You understand me? I want all 10 of you back on the ground breathing. That's the mission. Not the canyon, the people. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Yes, sir. Then what are you standing here for? Prescott said. And for the first time that night, the ghost of something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. You made a boy a promise. Go keep it. And that was all Evelyn Carter needed to hear. The next 20 minutes moved like a machine that had finally found its purpose. Harris and Ellison were bent over the terrain data, arguing over elevations, plotting the route foot by foot. Reynolds was on the radio coordinating the rescue helicopters that would need to come in behind her once the enemy was suppressed. And in the middle of it all, Major Evelyn Carter stood very still, gathering herself, doing the things she had done before every dangerous flight of her life. She thought about the people, not the mountains, not the walls, not the 10,000 ways it could go wrong. The people. She thought about Sergeant Doyle, whoever he was, a young man at the bottom of a canyon who had refused to leave his wounded. She thought about the 2 men who couldn't walk, lying there in the dark, trusting a voice on the radio they had never met. She thought about 8 other soldiers whose names she didn't know yet, whose families were asleep in houses all across America, not knowing that at this exact moment their sons and brothers and husbands were surrounded and praying. And she thought about the pilot from 9 years ago, the one who never knew that the frightened young lieutenant he saved would grow up to fly the same aircraft, chase the same impossible odds, carry the same stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind. She had spent 9 years wishing she could thank him. And tonight, in a way, she finally could. Not with words, with action, by doing for someone else exactly what he had done for her. Colonel Reynolds came up beside her while she was pulling on her helmet. He was quiet for a moment, the way old friends are quiet before something that might be goodbye. You don't have to do this, Evelyn, he said, low enough that only she could hear. The general gave you an out inside that order. He said bring yourself home too. If it looks wrong when you get there, if it's worse than the map, you turn around. Nobody in this room will say a word against you, I promise you that. Evelyn buckled the strap under her chin and looked at him, and there was no fear in her face now. Only certainty. Mike, she said, if I turn around, that boy dies believing help was coming, and then it didn't. Do you know what that does to a person? To spend your last minutes on Earth being lied to by the sky? She shook her head. I already told him I was coming. That's not a thing you take back. Reynolds swallowed hard. Then you come home. Both promises. You hear me? I hear you, she said. The radio crackled one more time before she walked out. Doyle's voice weaker now, but still holding on. Command, I don't know if the pilot is still there, but if she is, I just want her to know. My guys can hear us talking, and it's the first time all night they've stopped looking scared. A pause and the wall on. Whoever you are, ma'am, thank you for not hanging up on us. Evelyn crossed the room in 3 steps and hit the transmit button one last time before she left. Sergeant Doyle, she said, I'm walking to my aircraft right now. So I need you to do one thing for me. I need you to tell your men to keep their heads down and their eyes on the sky. Because the next sound they hear coming through that canyon is not going to be the enemy. It's going to be me. She paused. And Sergeant, one more thing. When this is over, when you're standing on solid ground somewhere safe, I want you to find me and shake my hand. Because I have a feeling you're the kind of man I'd be proud to know. Deal? There was a long silence. And then, through the static, came a sound that broke every heart in that command center. The young sergeant was crying. Not from fear, from something else. From the thing that lives on the other side of fear, The thing that comes when a person who was completely alone suddenly realizes they are not alone after all. Deal, ma'am, Doyle whispered. It's a deal. Evelyn let go of the button. She looked at Reynolds. She looked at Prescott. She looked at the three pilots who had said no and then given everything they had to help her go anyway. And then she turned and walked out the door and into the dark toward the flight line, where a squat, ugly, magnificent aircraft was already being fueled and armed. An aircraft that had been built for exactly one purpose, to go where no one else would go and protect the people that everyone else had given up on. Behind her in the command center, nobody spoke for a moment. And then General Prescott, the man who had walked in ready to write 11 soldiers off as ghosts, looked up at the map one final time, at the canyon, at the impossible line through the mountains. And he said very quietly, so quietly that most people in the room barely heard him, "Fly it low, Major. Fly it lower than any of them dared, and bring my people home." Out on the flight line, Major Evelyn Carter climbed the ladder into the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt. She ran her hands over the controls she knew better than her own heartbeat. She thought about a valley 9 years ago and a number painted under a stranger's wing, and a promise she had carried ever since. She thought about a young sergeant crying on a radio because someone finally said they were coming. And she thought about the two men who couldn't walk, waiting in the dark, trusting a voice they had never seen. Then she closed the canopy, started the engines, and felt the whole aircraft come alive underneath her. The mission that three pilots had refused. The mission a general had already given up. The mission everyone in that room had called impossible. It was hers now, and Evelyn Carter had never once, in her entire life, broken a promise to someone waiting in the dark. She pushed the throttle forward, and the Warthog began to roll. The wheels left the runway at 2:47 in the morning, and the moment they did, something inside Major Evelyn Carter went very quiet. It was always like this. On the ground, before a mission, her heart hammered, and her thoughts raced, and the fear crawled up her spine like it had every right to be there. But the second the aircraft lifted into the dark, all of that fell away, the way water falls off a stone. What was left behind was cold and clear and steady. 9 years of training, thousands of hours, and one single thought that burned brighter than all the others. 9 men were waiting, and she was the only one coming. "Wraith 1, you are airborne and cleared to depart," Reynolds' voice came through her headset, steady as a heartbeat. "We've got your route loaded. Harrison Ellison built it foot by foot. You follow that line, Major, and it'll take you right to the mouth of the canyon." "Copy. Wraith 1 is on the line," Evelyn answered. "Tell Doyle I'm in the air. Tell him the number under my wing tonight is his number. Tell him I said that." There was a pause on the radio. Then Reynolds said softly, "He heard you, Evelyn. He's not saying much, but he heard you." She banked the aircraft toward the mountains and let the throttle open up. And the Warthog answered the way it always did, ugly and honest and unstoppable. Some pilots complained the A-10 was slow. Evelyn had never once in her life thought of it that way. To her, the aircraft wasn't slow. It was patient. It was the kind of patient that stayed low over the men on the ground while the fast movers screamed by overhead and disappeared. It was the kind of patient that came back around for one more pass when the fancy jets had already gone home. She loved this aircraft the way you love something that has never let you down. And tonight, she needed it to not let her down more than she ever had before. At 2:53, the first voice from the canyon reached her. It was faint, chopped up by the mountains, but it was Doyle, and the moment she heard it, everything in her sharpened to a single point. "Wraith 1, this is Bravo. Are you the pilot? Are you the one who's coming?" "Bravo, this is Wraith 1. I'm the one who's coming, Sergeant. I'm about 11 minutes out. Give me a picture. What's happening down there?" "It's bad, ma'am." His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a young man holding himself together with both hands. "They pushed us off the north wall. We're pinned against the south side now. I've got my 2 wounded in a rock notch, and I've got the rest of my guys in a firing line trying to keep the enemy from coming down into us. But they've got a machine gun set up on a ledge above us. Every time one of my guys moves, it opens up. We can't lift our heads. We can't move the wounded. We're stuck." Evelyn's jaw tightened. A machine gun on a ledge. That was the thing that would kill them all. That was the thing she had to take away. "Doyle, listen to me. I need you to mark that gun for me. When I make my run, I need to know exactly where it is. Do you have anything that makes light? A chem stick, an infrared marker, anything?" I've got infrared strobes, ma'am, but if I light one up, they'll see where I am. They already know where you are, Evelyn said. That's not the problem anymore. The problem is I don't know where they are. So here's what we're going to do. When I call for it, and not 1 second before, you throw a strobe toward that machine gun position. Just toward it. Get it close. And then you get your whole element flat on the ground and you do not move. Because when I come through, I'm going to be low and I'm going to be loud. And I do not want a single one of you standing up. You understand me? Understood, ma'am. A pause. Wraith 1, how low are you going to be? And Evelyn, despite everything, almost smiled. Low enough that you're going to feel it in your teeth, Sergeant. Just keep your head down. At 2:56, 3 minutes from the canyon, the mountains rose up in front of her like a wall, and the reality of what she was about to do settled onto her shoulders with its full weight. She had flown low before. She had flown so low over convoys that men on the ground swore they could have touched her wheels. But she had never flown into a place like this, a place with walls on both sides, a place with a floor that twisted and climbed and dropped, a place where being wrong by 10 feet meant being dead. Wraith 1, Reynolds' voice came again, and there was something careful in it now. I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clean. Weather's moving in over the target. There's a low cloud layer building at the canyon mouth. It wasn't there 20 minutes ago. By the time you arrive, you may not have visual on the entrance. Evelyn's hands didn't move on the controls, but everything inside her went still. Cloud at the mouth of the canyon. That meant flying into a hole in the mountains at night, low and blind for the first few seconds. It meant trusting the route that Harris and Ellison had built, trusting the numbers, trusting the aircraft, and flying into darkness on faith until she broke out the other side. Copy, she said, and that was all she said, because there was nothing else to say. Evelyn. Reynolds' voice dropped, and now it was just her old friend talking, not the command center. Nobody would blame you for holding until it clears. How long until it clears, Mike? A silence. She already knew the answer. Weather says 3 hours, maybe 4. Doyle doesn't have 3 hours, Evelyn said. Doyle's got maybe 40 minutes before that gun on the ledge finishes the job. You know that, I know that. So we're not holding. I'm going in on the numbers. She took a breath. Read me the entry point again. Slow, I'm going to fly it in my head one more time before I do it for real. And Reynolds read it to her. Every heading, every elevation, every turn. And Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second, just one, and flew the whole thing in the dark behind her eyelids. In through the mouth. Drop to the floor. First turn left, tight. The floor climbs. Follow it. Right turn, tighter. And then the widening, where the canyon opened up, where Doyle and his men were pinned against the south wall, where the guns sat waiting on the ledge above them. She opened her eyes. I've got it, she said. Wraith 1 is beginning the approach. At 2:59, exactly 40 minutes after Sergeant Doyle first keyed his radio and begged the sky for help, Major Evelyn Carter flew her A-10 Thunderbolt into the cloud at the mouth of the canyon and disappeared. For 3 seconds, she saw nothing. Nothing at all. Just gray swallowing the aircraft, just the instruments glowing in front of her, just the numbers and her hands and her faith. 3 seconds is not a long time, unless you are flying blind between two mountains at night. Then 3 seconds is the longest thing in the world. And then the aircraft broke out the bottom of the cloud, and the canyon floor was right there, right underneath her, exactly where the number said it would be. And Evelyn Carter dropped the Warthog down into the belly of the mountain and began to fly the impossible. Wraith 1 is in the canyon, she said, and her voice was perfectly calm. Doyle, I'm inside. I'm coming to you. Stand by for my call. On the ground, 9 men who had spent the last hour believing they were going to die heard the sound of the A-10 for the very first time. It came before she did. A distant thunder, rolling down the stone walls, bouncing and building, filling the whole canyon with a roar that had no source and no direction. A roar that seemed to come from the mountain itself. And Sergeant Doyle, pressed flat against the rock with his rifle in his hands, felt something break loose in his chest that he had been holding down all night. She's really here. She's actually here. I hear you, Wraith 1, Doyle said, and his voice cracked. God, I hear you. My guys hear you. They're looking at they're like they can't believe it. Believe it, Sergeant, Evelyn said. Now get ready on that strobe. I'm coming around the last turn. When I call it, you throw. The first turn came at her fast, the left one, the tight one, and Evelyn banked the aircraft over and felt the wingtip carve through the air just feet from the stone. She didn't look at the wall. You never look at the wall. You look where you want to go, and you trust your hands to keep you off the thing that kills you. The floor climbed the way the numbers said it would, and she followed it up, holding the aircraft in that impossible groove between the ground and the rock. And then the right turn was there, tighter still, and she rolled into it and out of it, and ahead of her the canyon opened up into the widening, and she knew Doyle was down there somewhere in the dark. Doyle, throw it now. And on the ground, the young sergeant reared up out of cover for exactly 1 second, wound up his arm, and hurled the infrared strobe as hard as he could toward the ledge where the machine gun sat. Then he dropped back into the rocks and screamed at his men, "Down! Everybody down! Get down and stay down!" Through her night vision, Evelyn saw the strobe light up, tumbling through the dark, coming to rest on the slope below the ledge. And above it, close, so close, she saw the muzzle flashes. The machine gun, firing down at Doyle's men even now, even in the last seconds, chewing at the rocks they were hiding behind. She saw exactly where it was. She lined the aircraft up, and her thumb settled onto the trigger. "Wraith 1 is engaging," she said. "Doyle, keep everyone flat. This is going to be loud." At 3:01 in the morning, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon fired for the first time. There is no sound in the world like it. It is not a series of shots. It is a single roar, a tearing, ripping bellow, 3,900 rounds a minute, each one the size of a soda bottle, a sound so total that men who have heard it never forget it as long as they live. On the ground, Doyle's soldiers pressed themselves into the earth as the whole canyon seemed to split open above them. And on the ledge, the machine gun position simply ceased to exist. 1 second it was there, spitting fire. The next second there was nothing on that ledge at all. Evelyn pulled the aircraft up and around, climbing out of the widening, banking hard to come back for another look. "Doyle, report. Talk to me. Is that gun gone?" For a moment there was only static, and Evelyn's heart stopped, because in that silence lived every terrible possibility that she'd been off, that she'd hit the wrong slope, that she'd fired into her own people in the dark. And then Doyle's voice came through, shaking so hard she could barely understand him. "It's gone, ma'am. It's gone. The gun is gone. You took the whole ledge. My guys are, oh God, my guys are cheering. They're actually cheering. Wraith 1, that machine gun's been hunting us for an hour and you just erased it." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Copy. Bravo. That's one. But we're not done. What else is out there? Where's the rest of them?" "North wall, ma'am. They've still got fighters on the north wall up high. And I think they're trying to bring something else up. Something bigger. I saw them moving a tube. It might be an RPG team. It might be worse. An RPG team. On the north wall, high enough to fire down into the canyon, high enough to reach a helicopter, high enough to reach her." Evelyn's mind ran the geometry in a heartbeat. The rescue birds couldn't come in with that team active. They'd be shot out of the sky before they ever touched down. That team had to go, which meant another pass, another run through the canyon, low and slow, into a place where men with rockets were now watching the sky and waiting. "Wraith 1, this is Reynolds." The colonel's voice cut in, tight. "We copied that. Be advised. If they've got a rocket team dug in on the north wall, your next pass takes you right across their firing line. They'll be ready for you this time." "I know," Evelyn said. And she did know. The first pass had been a surprise. The enemy had never dreamed anyone would fly into that canyon, but now they knew. Now they'd heard the cannon, seen the ledge disappear, and they knew exactly what was hunting them. The second pass wouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The second pass, they'd be aiming at her. "You don't have to make that pass, Evelyn." Reynolds again, and there was something raw in his voice now. "We can wait for another asset. We can find another way." "There is no other asset, Mike. There is no other way. There's me, and there's a rocket team that's going to shoot down the rescue helicopters the second they show up. So I'm going to go take it away." She was already banking the aircraft, already lining up for the run back down the canyon. "Doyle, I need you again. Same as before. When I call it, I need that team marked. Can you see them from where you are?" "Barely, ma'am. They're up high and they're behind cover, but I can see the tube when they move it. I can get a strobe close." "Close is all I need. Get ready." Evelyn leveled the wings and dropped the aircraft back down toward the canyon floor. And this time, as she flew into the dark, She felt something she hadn't felt on the first pass. She felt watched. She felt the whole north wall turning toward her, dozens of eyes, tracking the sound of her engines, waiting for her to come into range. Every instinct in her body screamed to climb, to get high, to get out of the trap, and she ignored every one of them and flew lower. At 3:04, halfway down the canyon, the enemy on the north wall opened fire. She saw the tracers first, streams of green light reaching up and out toward her, floating almost lazily and then snapping past the canopy in a blur. Small arms, rifles, dozens of them, all firing at once, all trying to bring her down. She heard rounds strike the aircraft, a hard metal rain hammering against the fuselage, against the wings, against the titanium bathtub that surrounded her body and kept her alive. The Warthog shuddered under the impacts and kept flying. It always kept flying. That was the whole point of it. That was why she had chosen it. You could hit this aircraft all night long, and it would keep coming, keep flying, keep protecting the people on the ground below. Wraith 1 is taking fire, she said, and even now her voice was steady, because a shaking voice on the radio helps no one. Still flying? Doyle, where's that team? I need it now. I'm running out of canyon. Throwing it now, ma'am. And Doyle heaved another strobe up the slope, toward the notch in the north wall where he'd seen the tube move. It's short, it's below them, but they're right above the light, maybe 20 meters up. Right above the strobe, 20 meters above the strobe. Evelyn found the light, tracked up from it, and there, dug into the rock, she saw them. 3 men, and the long tube of a rocket launcher, already coming up, already swinging toward her. They were going to fire. In the next second, they were going to fire a rocket straight into her aircraft. And at this range, that low, there would be no surviving it. She fired first. The Avenger roared, and the north wall erupted, and the rocket team and the notch they were hiding in vanished in a storm of cannon fire. Evelyn flew straight through the debris, hauled the aircraft up and out of the canyon, and only when she was clear, only when she was climbing into the open sky above the mountains, did she let herself feel the pounding of her own heart. Doyle, report, the rocket team. Talk to me. And this time there was no delay. This time Doyle's voice came back instantly, wild with something between disbelief and joy. Gone, they're gone, Wraith 1. You got them. You got the tube. You got all of it. Ma'am, that rocket was coming up. I saw it. They were about to shoot you, and you beat them. You beat them by a half a second. Evelyn closed her eyes for just a moment, up there in the safe dark above the mountains. In half a second. That was the margin. That was how close it had been. And she knew, the way pilots know these things in their bones, that she had used up an enormous amount of luck tonight, and that luck was not something you could count on to keep showing up. Wraith 1, this is Reynolds. The colonel's voice was thick. We heard all of that. Evelyn, that was incredible flying. Now here's the good news. With that rocket team down, the rescue birds are cleared to launch. 2 Blackhawks are lifting off now, but he paused and Evelyn braced herself because there was always a but. But they're 40 minutes out, and your fuel state is a serious problem. You've been at full throttle, low altitude, maximum drag this whole time. You do not have 40 minutes of loiter fuel, not even close. And there it was, the thing that had been lurking under the whole mission from the very start. Fuel, the one enemy that no cannon could kill. Evelyn checked her gauges and her stomach dropped because Reynolds was right. She'd burned through her fuel at a brutal rate, flying low and slow and fighting for every one of those passes. She had maybe 25 minutes of flying time left, and the helicopters were 40 minutes out. The math was simple, and the math was cruel. If she stayed and protected Doyle's men until the helicopters arrived, she would run out of fuel over the mountains of Afghanistan, and she would not make it home. Say your fuel state, Wraith 1. Reynolds, quiet. Evelyn looked at the number. She said it out loud. And in the command center at Eglin, thousands of miles away, General Aldous Prescott heard it too, and closed his eyes. Evelyn. Reynolds' voice was barely a whisper now. That's not enough. You do the honest math right now out loud with me, Mom. If you stay until those helos arrive, you don't have the fuel to get to a divert field. You know that. You have to break off now, refuel, and we'll cover Doyle some other way. There is no other way, Mike. We've been over this. It's me or it's nothing. She was watching the canyon below her, watching the darkness where 9 men were waiting, believing she was going to stay, because she had told them she would stay. She had made a promise on the radio in front of a general, And now the promise and the fuel were pointing in exactly opposite directions. And that was the twist that no one in that command center had seen coming, because the enemy wasn't the thing that was going to break Evelyn Carter's promise. The mountains weren't going to break it. The rocket team hadn't broken it. The only thing that could break it was the slow, silent, unstoppable arithmetic of a fuel gauge sliding toward empty. She could save those men, or she could save herself. She could not do both. That was the truth the numbers were telling her, and she hated the numbers with everything in her. At 3:09, Major Evelyn Carter made the decision that would define the rest of her life. Doyle. Her voice, when she keyed the radio, was as steady and warm as if she were talking to him across a kitchen table. How are your wounded holding up? They're hanging on, ma'am. A pause. Barely. One of them, he keeps asking if the plane is still up there. Every couple minutes. He just keeps asking, is she still up there? Is she still with us? I keep telling him yes. I keep telling him you're not going anywhere. Another pause. You're not going anywhere, right, Wraith One? And there it was, the question, the one that pointed straight at the fuel gauge, the one that Reynolds and Prescott and every soul in the command center was waiting to hear her answer. She could tell Doyle the truth. She could tell him she had to leave, that she was out of bois, that she'd done everything she could, and now she had to go save herself. Every rule, every regulation, every ounce of common sense said that was the right answer. She'd already done more than anyone had asked. Nobody would blame her. Prescott had told her himself, bring yourself home too. Evelyn looked at the fuel gauge one more time, and then she looked at the dark canyon where a wounded soldier kept asking if she was still up there. No, Sergeant, she said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. You tell your man I'm still up here. You tell him I'm going to be up here until every last one of you is safe. You tell him the plane is not leaving. Do you hear me? The plane is not leaving. Evelyn, no, Reynolds' voice broke on the radio. Evelyn, don't do this. You don't have the fuel. You're signing your own. I made him a promise, Mike. She said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact that has already been decided. I told that boy I was coming, and then I told him I was staying. And a promise isn't a promise if you only keep it when it's cheap. I'm staying. Now stop arguing with me and start figuring out how to get those helicopters here faster, because that's the only math that matters now. In the command center, there was silence. And then Prescott stepped up to the console himself, took the headset from Reynolds' hands, and spoke to her for the first time since she'd left the ground. Major Carter, the general's voice was rough. This is Prescott. I gave you an order to bring yourself home. Both promises. Do you remember? I remember, sir. Then you listen to me. I am not going to sit here and listen to one of my pilots run herself dry over a mountain. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to solve your fuel problem, and we are going to solve it right now because I am not accepting the math you just laid out. Do you understand me? Evelyn blinked. Sir? Get me a tanker, Prescott barked at the room, spinning away from the console. I want to know every air refueling asset within reach of that airspace, and I want it 2 minutes ago. Somebody find me a tanker and find me a route to get Carter to it. Move! And the command center exploded into motion. Because a general who had walked in ready to write 11 men off as ghosts was now moving heaven and earth to keep one pilot alive. And everyone in that room felt the change, felt it in their bones, and threw themselves at the problem. But even as they searched, Evelyn knew the truth, and she suspected Prescott knew it too. A tanker took time. Time to launch, time to fly, time to rendezvous. And she didn't have time. She had 22 minutes now, and the helicopters were still 35 minutes out. The tanker, wherever it was, would come too late to change the choice she had already made. She was going to stay. And staying was going to cost her. At 3:12, the enemy came back. She saw them before Doyle did. Movement on the ridgelines, on both walls now, more of them than before. The first passes had hurt them, killed their gun team and their rocket team, but there were more fighters coming down out of the high country, drawn by the fight, and they were massing on the ridges above the canyon, getting ready to pour down into the widening where Doyle's men were pinned. If they got down into that canyon, if they closed the distance, it would become a knife fight in the dark, and 9 exhausted men with 2 wounded would not win it. Doyle, Evelyn's voice was sharp now, you've got company coming. Both ridges. They're massing up high, and they're going to try to rush you before the helicopters get here. I can see them from up here. I'm going to keep them off you. But I need you to hold your line, and I need you to trust me. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like up there, you keep your men flat and you let me work. Can you do that? We can do that, ma'am. His voice was steadier now, stronger. Something about her being up there had put steel back into him. We'll hold. You just keep doing what you're doing. And so Evelyn Carter went to work. She flew the canyon again, and then again, and then again. Pass after pass, low and slow, the cannon roaring, breaking up the enemy every time they tried to gather, driving them back off the ridges, keeping them away from the men below. Each pass burned fuel she didn't have. Each pass took her back through the gauntlet of small arms fire, and the Warthog took hit after hit and kept flying. She lost count of the passes. She stopped looking at the fuel gauge because looking at it didn't help, and she needed her eyes on the enemy. She flew on instinct and training and love, and every time Doyle's voice came through the radio saying they were still holding, still alive, still there, she found the strength to bank the aircraft around and go back in one more time. Wraith 1, tanker is airborne, Reynolds' voice ragged with hope. We found one. She's coming as fast as she can. But Evelyn, your fuel, you're past the point where you can reach her and still have reserves. If you break off right now, this second, you might make the rendezvous. But every pass you make, you lose that option. Every pass, the tanker gets further out of reach. I saw him. Evelyn heard him. She understood him perfectly. He was telling her that there was still a door open, that if she left right now, abandoned Doyle in this exact moment, she could still save herself. And she understood with total clarity that every time she turned back into that canyon, she was closing that door a little further until soon it would be closed for good. She turned back into the canyon. Wraith 1 is re-engaging, she said. The door's staying open for Doyle, Mike, not for me. At 3:19, something changed in the fight, and it was not good. Wraith 1, this is Bravo. Doyle, and now there was real fear back in his voice. They got smart. They're not massing on the ridge anymore. They're coming down the walls in 2s and 3s, spread out. You can't hit them all with one pass. There's too many places. They're going to get down into the canyon with us. Evelyn saw it too. The enemy had learned. They'd stopped bunching up where her cannon could destroy them all at once and started filtering down the walls in small groups using the rocks, coming at Doyle's position from a dozen directions at once. She couldn't kill a dozen small groups with a cannon built to destroy a tank. There were too many of them, too spread out, too close to Doyle's men now to fire without risking her own people. Doyle, how close are they to you? Close, ma'am. 50 meters and shrinking. If they get any closer, I can't have you shooting. You'll hit us. But if you stop shooting, they're going to overrun us. I don't know what to do, Wraith 1. Tell me what to do. And Evelyn Carter, flying an aircraft on the last of its fuel over a canyon full of the enemy, thousands of miles from home, understood that she had come to the final wall, the thing that no cannon could break. The enemy was too close now for her to fire safely and too many to stop. And the helicopters were still 15 minutes out, and she had maybe 8 minutes of fuel remaining, and the whole thing, the whole beautiful, impossible rescue, was about to fall apart in the last 10 minutes. Unless she keyed the radio, and when she spoke, there was something new in her voice, something that made Reynolds sit up straight in the command center thousands of miles away. Doyle, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not argue. In about 90 seconds, I'm going to make a pass that is going to be closer and lower than anything I've done tonight. I'm not going to fire the cannon because you're right, you're too close. I'm going to come down that canyon so low and so loud that every enemy fighter down there is going to think the whole sky is coming apart. I'm going to fly right over the top of them. And when I do, every one of them is going to hit the ground and cover their heads, because that's what a human being does when a warthog comes at them from 40 feet. And in those few seconds, while they're all face down in the dirt, I need you and every man who can walk to grab your wounded and move. You move toward the mouth of the canyon, toward where the helicopters are going to land, and you do not stop. Do you understand me? There was a long silence, and then Doyle said very quietly, Ma'am, if you come down that low over armed men, with no cannon, they're going to shoot at you the whole way. You'll be a target the whole length of the canyon. Point blank. I know exactly what I'll be, Sergeant, Evelyn said gently. You let me worry about that. Your job is to move your men the second I pass over. That's it. That's the whole plan. I clear you a path with noise and fear, and you run through it. Can you do that? Another silence. And Reynolds swore later that he heard the young man's voice break clean in half. Doyle said, "We'll be ready, ma'am. We'll move. Just, Wraith One, just please. Please come back around after. Please don't let this be the last time I hear you." And Evelyn Carter, lining up her aircraft for the most dangerous pass of her entire life, with the enemy waiting and her fuel nearly gone and everything hanging by a thread, answered him the only way she knew how. "Sergeant Doyle," she said, "I already promised you that you and I are going to shake hands when this is over, and I have never once broken a promise to somebody waiting in the dark. So you get your men ready, because I'm coming down that canyon one more time, and this time we're all getting out together." She rolled the aircraft over. She pointed its nose down into the darkness between the mountains, and with the fuel gauge sliding toward empty and the whole enemy force waiting below, Major Evelyn Carter dropped the Warthog lower than she had ever flown in her life and started her run. The Warthog came down into the canyon at 3:21, and it came down like the wrath of God. Evelyn flew it lower than the numbers, lower than Harrison Ellison had ever plotted, lower than any pilot in that command center would have believed a human being could hold an aircraft. She was so low that the enemy fighters scattered across the canyon floor didn't hear her coming from a distance and take cover. They didn't have time. One moment they were creeping toward Doyle's position, rifles up, closing in for the kill. The next moment, the entire sky came apart directly over their heads, a wall of sound and wind and screaming metal that hit them like a physical blow, and every single one of them did exactly what Evelyn had known they would do. They threw themselves flat. They covered their heads. They stopped being soldiers and became terrified human beings pressed into the dirt, certain they were about to die. And in those few seconds, while the enemy cowered, Sergeant Doyle screamed the order that saved his men. "Move! Move now! Grab the wounded and go! Go! Get!" They moved. 9 men who had been pinned in that canyon for over an hour, who had watched a machine gun hunt them, and a rocket team rise up to kill their pilot, who had been certain, most of them, that they were going to in that hole in the mountains. They moved. 2 men hauled up the first casualty between them. 2 more grabbed the second, the one who kept asking if the plane was still up there. And the rest formed a moving wall of rifles around them. And they ran for the mouth of the canyon, for the place where the helicopters would come, running through the gap that Evelyn had torn open with nothing but noise and courage and 40 feet of altitude. But Doyle had been right about one thing. Coming down that low, overarmed men, with no cannon firing to keep their heads down after the first shock passed, made Evelyn a target the entire length of the canyon. And the shock did pass. Within seconds, the enemy fighters realized the aircraft wasn't firing, realized it was just flying over them, and the ones who recovered first rolled onto their backs and pointed their rifles straight up and emptied their magazines into the belly of the Warthog as it thundered past. Evelyn felt every hit. The aircraft bucked and shuddered under the impacts. A hammering, ringing storm of metal against metal, rounds punching into the wings, into the fuselage, into the armored tub that was the only thing between the bullets and her body. A warning light flared on her panel, then another. She ignored them both. She held the aircraft in its impossible groove down the canyon floor, straight and level and low, giving Doyle every second she could, refusing to climb, refusing to brake, refusing to leave until she saw his men clear of the killing ground. "Doyle, talk to me. Are you moving? Are you clear?" "We're moving, ma'am." His voice was breathless, pounding, the sound of a man running for his life and the lives of his men. "We're past them. We're past the ones that were closest. You broke them. Wide open, Wraith One. They're still face down. We're getting through. Keep running. Don't stop. I'm coming back around." Evelyn hauled the aircraft up and out of the canyon, and now the warning lights weren't just flickering. They were screaming at her, and she made herself look at them for the first time, and what she saw turned her blood to ice. At 3:23, Major Evelyn Carter learned that the last pass had cost her more than fuel. "Wraith One, this is Reynolds." The colonel's voice was sharp with alarm. "We're seeing something on the data feed. Your engine, Evelyn, we're seeing a problem with your left engine. Check your readouts. Talk to me." She was already looking. The left engine was losing power. One of those rounds out of the hundreds that had torn into her aircraft had found something vital. The temperature was climbing. The pressure was falling. And Evelyn Carter, who had flown into this canyon on the last of her fuel, now understood that she was flying a wounded aircraft on top of it. The A-10 was famous for coming home on one engine. It had been built for exactly this, built to take punishment that would kill any other aircraft and keep flying. But one engine meant less power and less power over these mountains. With this little fuel changed every calculation she had left. "I see it, Mike," she said, and her voice didn't shake because she had learned a long time ago that a shaking voice helps no one. "Left engine's hit. She's running hot. I'm going to lose her soon." "Then you break off now." Reynolds, and there was no argument left in him, only desperation. "Evelyn, listen to me. One engine, that fuel state, you have to point that aircraft towards safe airspace right now and start climbing while you still can. If you make one more pass, if you lose that engine over the canyon, you will not have the power to get out. You'll go into the wall. Do you understand what I'm telling you? One more pass and you're dead." Evelyn looked down at the canyon below her. She could see Doyle's men now, a small cluster of shapes moving through the dark toward the mouth of the canyon. So close to safety. So close. But behind them, the enemy was recovering. The fighters who had thrown themselves flat were getting back up, and they were turning and they were seeing the wounded soldiers running, exposed, out in the open, and they were raising their rifles. If she left now, she might save herself. And Doyle's men would be cut down from behind in the last 100 meters, with the helicopters almost in sight. If she stayed, she would almost certainly die. That was the choice. That was the whole terrible choice. Laid out clean and simple, and there was no tanker fast enough, and no miracle waiting, and no third option. Save herself or save them, one last time. Wraith won. It was Prescott now, and the general's voice was thick with something Evelyn had never heard from a man like him. "Major Carter, I am ordering you to break off. Do you hear me? This is a direct order from your commanding general. Turn that aircraft towards safe airspace. I am not asking. I am ordering you to save your own life." And Evelyn Carter, at 3:24 in the morning, over a canyon in the mountains of Afghanistan, disobeyed a direct order for the first and only time in her career. "Sir," she said quietly, "I heard your order, and I want it on the record that I heard it clearly. But there are men down there who are going to die in the next 60 seconds if I leave, and I can't do it, sir. I can't fly away and listen to it happen on the radio, so I'm going to make one more pass, and then I'll come home. I promise you I'll try to come home." She took a breath. "But I have to go back. I'm sorry, sir. I have to go back." She rolled the aircraft over. In the command center, General Aldous Prescott stood frozen with the headset pressed to his ear, and everyone around him watched the man who had walked in ready to abandon 11 soldiers now stand helpless as a pilot flew back into the fire against his direct order. He could have screamed at her. He could have relieved her, court-martialed her, thrown every word in the regulations at her. And instead, after a long moment, the general did something that no one in that room had ever seen him do. He closed his eyes and he said, so softly it was almost a prayer, "Then go, Major. God help you. Go get them." At 3:25, the Warthog came down into the canyon for the last time. The left engine was dying now, and Evelyn could feel it. Could feel the aircraft pulling to one side. Could feel the sluggishness in the controls. Could feel that this magnificent, ugly, faithful machine was reaching the very end of what it could give her. She nursed it down toward the canyon floor, lower and slower than ever, and this time she did not fly over the enemy to frighten them. This time she came in behind Doyle's men, between them and the fighters who were rising up to fire on their backs, and she put her aircraft directly in the line of fire. She became the shield, exactly as she had told Prescott she would, hours ago and a lifetime ago, in a command center where everyone said it couldn't be done. She flew her wounded aircraft between the enemy and the men she had come to save, and she drew every rifle in that canyon onto herself. And they fired. God, how they fired. The whole canyon lit up with tracers reaching for her, and the rounds slammed into the Warthog from every angle. And Evelyn held the aircraft steady in the storm, refusing to break, refusing to climb, keeping her body and her aircraft between the bullets and Doyle's men until they were clear, until they were out, until every last one of them had run through the mouth of the canyon and out into the open ground beyond. "We're out, ma'am!" Doyle's voice exploded through the radio, ragged and sobbing and triumphant all at once. "We're clear of the canyon. All of us, all 9, we're out. You did it, Wraith 1. You got us out. We're clear." And Evelyn Carter, in the burning wreck that her aircraft had become, allowed herself one single second of joy. They were out. 9 men who were supposed to die tonight were alive and clear and safe. The thing that 3 pilots had called impossible and a general had already given up on, she had done it. She had kept her promise. And then the left engine died. At 3:26, the Warthog lost half its power over the deepest part of the canyon, and Major Evelyn Carter began to fall. The aircraft dropped. The nose pitched down. The controls went heavy and strange in her hands. And Evelyn, with the skill of thousands of hours and the calm of a person who has already made peace with the moment, fought the aircraft with everything she had. She fed in power from the one engine that still lived. She pulled back on the stick, coaxing, begging, demanding that the aircraft climb out of the canyon before the walls could take her. The Warthog groaned. It shuddered. It clawed at the air, and slowly, agonizingly, it began to rise, dragging itself up out of the canyon on one dying engine in the sheer refusal of the woman flying it to give up. Wraith 1, we lost your left engine on the data. Talk to me! Talk to me! Reynolds was shouting now, all composure gone, just a terrified man screaming at a radio. Still flying, Mike. Her voice was strained now, tight with the effort of hauling the aircraft up. One engine, climbing, barely, but climbing. Where's your fuel, Evelyn? Where is your fuel? And Evelyn looked at the gauge, and she gave him the number. And in the command center thousands of miles away, the number landed like a death sentence, because it was almost nothing. It was minutes. It was the difference between a few breaths and a few more. She had used everything getting out of that canyon, and now she was climbing on the last drops of fuel in a wounded aircraft over hostile mountains, hundreds of miles from anywhere safe. The tanker. Prescott's voice cut in, hard and fast. Where is the tanker? Get me the tanker's position now. Tanker's inbound, sir, but she's still 110 miles out, someone shouted. At Carter's fuel state, at one engine, there's no way she reaches the rendezvous. The math doesn't work. She can't make it to the tanker. And there it was again. The math. The cruel, silent arithmetic that had haunted this whole mission. Evelyn had beaten the canyon. She'd beaten the machine gun and the rocket team and the enemy fighters and a direct order and her own fear. But she could not beat the fuel gauge. Nobody beats the fuel gauge. And the number on hers was almost 0. Wraith 1. Reynolds' voice had gone quiet now. Terribly, awfully quiet. The quiet of a man who was starting to understand that he might be about to listen to his friend die. Evelyn, talk to me. What's your plan? You have to have a plan. Tell me you have a plan. And Evelyn Carter, climbing out over the mountains on a dying engine and empty tanks, was quiet for a moment. Because the honest answer was that she didn't have a plan. She had a wounded aircraft, almost no fuel, and 110 miles of nothing between her and the only thing that could save her. The honest answer was that she had made her choice back in that canyon, made it with her eyes wide open, and the price of that choice was coming due now. But Evelyn Carter had never in her life been the kind of person who gave up while the propeller was still turning. And so, instead of accepting the math, she started looking for a way to break it. Mike, she said slowly, that tanker, what's her altitude? Standard, why? Tell her to climb. Tell her to climb as high as she can and I'll come to her from above. If I can get some altitude, real altitude, I can shut down the good engine and glide. A Warthog glides better than people think. I trade height for distance. I ride her down toward the tanker with the engine off, save every drop of fuel I've got left, and I only light the engine back up when I absolutely have to. It's not much, but it's more miles than I've got right now. There was a stunned silence on the radio, and then Reynolds said, Evelyn, glide in A-10 100 miles? Nobody's ever flown that canyon either, Mike. A pause, and then softer, something almost like a smile in her voice, exhausted and battered but unbroken. I'm getting kind of used to doing things nobody's ever done tonight. Now tell that tanker to climb and give me a heading. I'm not done yet. At 3:29, Major Evelyn Carter began the longest, quietest, most desperate flight of her life. She climbed as high as the dying aircraft would take her, wringing every foot of altitude out of the one engine that still ran. And when she had all the height she was going to get, she did the thing that no sane pilot ever wants to do over enemy territory. She reached down and she shut the engine off, and the aircraft went silent. The roar that had filled her cockpit all night simply stopped. There was only the wind now, rushing over the canopy, and the creak of the wounded airframe, and the sound of her own breathing. She had turned her aircraft into a glider, a heavy, battered, ugly glider, and she pointed its nose toward the distant tanker and began to trade her precious altitude for miles, floating down through the dark sky, silent as a ghost, riding the last of her luck toward a fuel line she could not yet see. Wraith 1 is engine off and gliding, she reported, and even her radio voice was quieter now, as if the silence of the aircraft had gotten into her too. Tanker, this is Carter. I'm coming to you from up high, and I'm coming with no power. So I need you to make this easy on me, sweetheart. I need you to be exactly where you say you are, because I'm only going to get one shot at this, and I don't have the fuel to go around and try again. The tanker pilot's voice came back, a woman's voice, warm and steady. Wraith 1, this is Tanker. I hear you and I've got you. I'm climbing to you right now and I am not going anywhere. You just fly that beautiful, ugly airplane to me, honey, and I'll have the boom out and waiting. We're going to get you home. And Evelyn, in the silent cockpit of her dying aircraft, felt something sting behind her eyes at those words. Because all night she had been the one saying, we're going to get you home. She had been the one telling frightened people that help was coming. And now, at the very end, worn down to nothing, out of fuel and out of engine and almost out of time, she was the one being told. She was the one who needed someone to come, and someone was coming. At 3:34, gliding through the dark, Evelyn heard Doyle's voice one more time. Wraith 1, this is Bravo. The birds are here, ma'am. The helicopters just touched down. They're loading my wounded now. Both of them, they're both still alive. They're gonna make it. And ma'am, his voice broke. The one who kept asking if you were still up there, he's on the bird now. And the last thing he said before they loaded him, he said, tell the pilot. Tell the pilot I felt her up there the whole time. Tell her I wasn't scared once she came. Evelyn closed her eyes for just a second, gliding silent through the dark. You tell him, she said, and her voice was thick now, all the calm finally cracking just a little. You tell him it was the honor of my life to be up there with him. You tell all of them that, in Doyle. She swallowed hard. You get on that helicopter too. You get out of there. You hear me? Not till you're clear, ma'am. His voice was fierce. I'm not getting on that bird until I know you made it. That was the deal, remember? We're supposed to shake hands when this is over. So you don't get to bow out on me now. You make it to that tanker, Wraith 1. You make it, and then I'll get on the helicopter, and not 1 second before. And despite everything, despite the empty tanks and the dead engine and the enemy still behind her and the 100 cold miles of darkness ahead, Major Evelyn Carter laughed, a soft, broken, wondering laugh. You're a stubborn one, Sergeant Doyle. Learned it from you tonight, ma'am. At 3:41, the good engine's fuel warning went from a light to a scream, and Evelyn knew she had reached the moment of truth. She was still gliding. She had covered an enormous distance in silence, trading every foot of altitude for miles, nursing the wounded aircraft down through the night sky toward the tanker she still could not see. But she was running out of sky now. She was getting low. And soon, very soon, she was going to have to light that one good engine back up to close the final distance. And when she did, it was going to drink the last of her fuel in great, desperate gulps. And if the tanker wasn't exactly where it was supposed to be, if the rendezvous was off by even a little, she would flame out for good with nothing left, too low to glide and too far to reach. Tanker, this is Carter. I'm getting low and I'm about out of glide. I need a position check. Where are you? Tell me you're close. Tell me you're right where you said. And the answer that came back was the one she had been dreading. Wraith 1, the tanker pilot's warm voice had changed. There was tension in it now. Carter, honey, we've got a problem. There's weather between us. A storm cell moved into the corridor and I had to divert around it. I'm still coming to you, but I'm not where I said I'd be. I'm further out than we planned. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm coming as fast as this old girl will go, but you're going to have to stretch it further than we thought. Silence on the radio, in the command center, in the helicopter, in the tanker. Everyone who was listening felt the floor drop out from under them. Further out. She had to stretch it further, and there was no further to stretch. She was already flying on fumes and prayers. Say the distance, Evelyn said quietly. The tanker pilot said the number. And Evelyn Carter, lone in the dark in a dead aircraft over the mountains, did the math one final time. And the math said no. The math said there was not enough fuel, and not enough altitude and not enough distance. The math said that this was where it ended, that she had spent everything saving 9 men, and there was nothing left to save herself with, that she was going to fall out of the sky somewhere in these black mountains and never come home. That was what the math said. But Evelyn Carter had spent the whole night proving the math wrong. She had proven it wrong at the canyon mouth. She had proven it wrong on every pass, and she was not about to start believing it now. Not when she was this close. Not when a stubborn young sergeant was refusing to board a helicopter until she made it. Not when a tanker pilot she'd never met was flying an old aircraft as fast as it would go to reach her. Not when a general who'd given up on everyone was standing in a command center whispering prayers for her life. "Okay," she said, and her voice was steady again, perfectly steady, the voice of a pilot who has decided she is not finished yet. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Everybody listen, because I'm only going to say this once. Tanker, you keep coming, fast as you can, straight line, forget the weather, punch through it. Mike, I need you to do something for me. I need you to trust me one more time tonight, because I'm about to try something, and it's going to look wrong on your screens, and I need you to not panic." "Evelyn, what are you—" "I'm going to dive," she said. "I'm going to point the nose down, and I'm going to build up all the speed I can, and I'm going to trade it back for distance at the bottom. It's the oldest trick there is. It's the first thing they teach you and the last thing you ever want to use. But it'll buy me miles I don't have any other way. And then I'm going to light the engine, and I'm going to make a run straight at that tanker, and I'm going to hit that boom on the first try because there is no second try." A pause. "So tanker, you said you'd have the boom out and waiting. I'm going to need you to mean that." "I mean it, Wraith One, by—" The tanker pilot's voice was iron now. "You come to me. The boom will be there. I swear it on my life. You just get here." At 3:44, Major Evelyn Carter pointed the nose of her dead aircraft down toward the Black Mountains and dove. The wind rose to a howl over the canopy. The airspeed climbed. The battered airframe shuddered and moaned around her, protesting, every rivet and seam of it. But it held, because it was an A-10, because it was built to take punishment and keep going, because it had never once let her down, and it was not going to start now. She dove, gathering speed she would spend on distance, falling toward the earth to buy herself the miles that would carry her to the tanker. And it was the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing she had ever done, plunging silent and powerless through the dark, betting her life on physics and faith and the promise of a stranger's voice. And at the bottom of the dive, when she had all the speed the aircraft could give her, she pulled level, and she reached down, and she lit the one good engine. It caught. Thank God, it caught. The engine roared back to life, drinking the last of her fuel, and Evelyn pushed the aircraft forward toward the place where the tanker should be, riding her speed and her dying engine straight into the darkness, watching the fuel gauge fall toward absolute zero, searching the black sky ahead for the lights of the aircraft that was her only hope of ever seeing home again. "Tanker, Carter, I'm on my run. Engines lit. I'm coming to you. Where are you? I need to see you. I need to see you now." "Look up and left, Wraith One," the tanker pilot cried. "Look up and to your left. I've got my lights on full. I'm right here. I'm right here." And Evelyn looked up and to the left, and through the darkness, faint at first and then blazing, she saw them. Lights, the lights of the tanker, dead ahead, boom already extended, already reaching back toward her like a hand held out in the dark. And behind those lights, an aircraft full of strangers who had flown through a storm to reach her, who had climbed and turned and pushed an old airframe past its limits, all for a pilot they had never met. Because that is what people do for each other in the sky when everything is on the line. "I see you," Evelyn breathed. "Oh, thank God I see you. I'm coming up on you. Steady, sweetheart. Hold her steady." She closed the distance. The fuel gauge read zero now. Actual zero. She was flying on nothing but the fumes in the lines and the momentum from her dive. And she knew that the engine could quit at any second, that she had one chance and one chance only to connect with that boom before her aircraft went silent for the last time. She eased in behind the tanker, lined up on the boom, that thin metal lifeline stretching back toward her out of the dark, and with hands that had flown a canyon and shielded 9 men and refused a general's order and dove a dead aircraft through the night, she made the most important connection of her life. "Contact," Evelyn said, and her voice broke on the word. Contact! I'm on the boom! I'm taking fuel! Oh God! I'm taking fuel! And in the command center at Eglin Air Force Base, thousands of miles away, a room full of hardened military professionals who had spent the last hour and a half certain they were about to lose one of their own erupted. Grown men and women grabbed each other. Somebody was crying. Somebody was laughing. And General Aldous Prescott, the man who had walked in ready to write off 11 soldiers as ghosts, put his hand over his mouth and turned away from the room so that no one would see his face. She made it, Reynolds whispered into the radio, and he wasn't even trying to sound like a colonel anymore. He was just a man whose friend was going to live. Evelyn, Evelyn, you made it. You're taking fuel. You're going to come home. I'm going to come home, Mike, she answered, and now the tears were running freely down her face in the dark cockpit, and she didn't fight them, because there was no one to see and nothing left to prove. Tell Prescott, tell him both promises. Tell him I brought them home, and I'm bringing myself home too. Tell him I didn't leave anybody in the valley, not one single soul. Oh, yeesh. And then, on the radio, through all the static and the distance and the noise of two aircraft joined together in the dark, came one more voice. Sergeant Doyle, still on the ground, still refusing to board his helicopter, still holding on because he'd made a deal. Wraith 1, he said, and you could hear that he'd been crying too. Hear it in every word. Ma'am, did you make it? Tell me you made it. Tell me I can get on this helicopter now. And Major Evelyn Carter, connected to a lifeline in the black sky over the mountains of Afghanistan, alive, fueling, coming home, gave the young sergeant the answer she had promised him hours ago and a lifetime ago, back when everyone said it couldn't be done. I made it, Sergeant Doyle, she said softly. I'm taking fuel right now. I'm coming home. So you get on that helicopter and you go get yourself safe. But you remember our deal, you and me. When this is all over, we shake hands. Because I meant what I said. You're the kind of man I'd be proud to know, and I intend to know you for a very long time. There was a long silence on the radio, and then Sergeant Doyle, climbing at last onto the helicopter that would carry him to safety, his voice thick and broken and full of a gratitude too big for words, gave her the only answer he had left. It's a deal, ma'am, he said. It's a deal. And high above the mountains, drinking fuel from a lifeline held out by strangers, her wounded aircraft battered and scarred but flying, her promises kept and her people safe, Major Evelyn Carter turned her nose toward home. The tanker fed her fuel for 11 minutes, and Evelyn Carter did not say a word the entire time. She just flew. She held her position behind the boom, steady as she'd ever held anything. And she watched the fuel gauge climb up off of zero and keep climbing. And with every pound of fuel that flowed into her tanks, something in her chest loosened just a little more. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together until she started to come apart. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear. The fear had passed. This was something else. The trembling that comes after, when the body finally understands that the danger is over and lets go of everything it's been carrying. Wraith 1, you're looking good, the tanker pilot said gently. You've got plenty now, honey. More than enough to get you to the divert field. You did it. You can breathe now. I don't know if I remember how, Evelyn said, and there was a wet, broken laugh underneath the words. Then I'll remind you, in through the nose, out through the mouth, same as you taught those boys on the ground all night. You spent this whole mission getting other people through the worst moment of their lives. Now it's your turn. So breathe, Wraith 1. I've got you. And Evelyn breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, and behind the boom of a stranger's aircraft, thousands of miles from home, in the dark over the mountains of Afghanistan, Major Evelyn Carter finally let herself feel the full weight of what she had just done, and it nearly broke her. At 4:02, the boom disconnected, and Evelyn eased her battered aircraft away from the tanker. Wraith 1 is clear and topped off, she reported. Tanker, I don't have the words. You flew through a storm to reach me. You didn't even know my name. I know it now, the tanker pilot said. Evelyn Carter. And I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life. Now you get that beautiful wreck of an airplane on the ground and you let somebody buy you a cup of coffee. You've earned about 1,000 of them tonight. Tanker's clearing off. Fly safe, sister. And then the tanker was gone, peeling away into the dark, and Evelyn was alone in the sky again. But it was a different alone now. It was the alone of a person who is going to live. She turned her nose toward the divert field, the closest safe runway, and she flew. And for a while, she just let the silence hold her. But the silence didn't last because Colonel Reynolds was waiting on the radio, and he'd been waiting to say something for the better part of an hour. And now that she was safe, it came pouring out of him. Evelyn, his voice was rough, you disobeyed a direct order from the general tonight. You understand that. You heard him order you to break off and you flew back into that canyon anyway. I know, Mike. She was too tired to defend herself, too tired to do anything but tell the truth. I know exactly what I did. And when I'm on the ground, I'll answer for it. All of it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear him. I heard him. I couldn't do what he asked. That's all. I couldn't. There was a pause, and then Reynolds said quietly, "That's not why I brought it up." Another pause. "The general wants to talk to you himself. He's been standing here for the last 20 minutes not saying anything, just watching the screen. Hang on." And then General Aldous Prescott's voice came onto the radio, and Evelyn braced herself for it, because she had disobeyed him in front of his entire command center. And a man like Prescott did not let a thing like that go. "Major Carter." "Sir." She kept her voice steady. "Before you say anything, sir, I want to be clear. I heard your order. I understood it completely. And I disobeyed it with full knowledge of what I was doing. I'm not going to make excuses. When I land, I'll accept whatever comes." There was a long silence on the radio, so long that Evelyn started to wonder if she'd lost the connection. And then Prescott spoke, and his voice was not what she expected. It was not the cold, hard voice of the man who'd walked into the command center, ready to write 11 soldiers off. It was something rougher, something that had been broken open and put back together over the course of one very long night. "Major," Prescott said, "tonight I walked into a room and I looked at a map and I made a decision. I decided that 11 men were already dead. I did the math, and the math said they couldn't be saved, and I was ready to write their names on a list and notify their families in the morning. I've been doing this a long time. I've made that call before, and I told myself it was the responsible thing, the realistic thing. I told myself that a good commander knows when a fight is lost." He paused, and Evelyn heard him take a breath that shook. "And then a pilot I'd never met stood up in the back of my room and told me I was wrong." Evelyn didn't say anything. She just listened. "You were wrong to disobey my order, Major," Prescott went on. "And I was wrong to give it. Both things are true. I ordered you to break off because I could not stand the thought of losing you. And that was a human thing, and I don't regret the feeling behind it. But I was ordering you to abandon 9 men to save 1 pilot, and you knew something I'd forgotten. You knew that the math is never the whole story. You knew that sometimes a person just decides that certain things are not going to happen on their watch, and then they make it so, no matter what the numbers say." His voice dropped. "You reminded an old man of something tonight, Evelyn. You reminded me why I put this uniform on in the first place, and I am not going to forget it again." Evelyn's eyes were burning. "Sir, I'm not finished." A pause. "There will be an investigation. There has to be. You flew a profile that violated a dozen regulations. You took an aircraft into terrain that no manual would ever approve, and you disobeyed a direct order from your commanding general. All of that is going to be examined, and I can't stop it. And I wouldn't stop it if I could, because that's how the system works and the system matters." Another pause, and now something almost like warmth crept into his voice. "But I want you to hear me clearly, Major Carter. When that investigation happens, I'm going to be standing right next to you, and I am going to tell every single person in that room exactly what I saw tonight. I am going to tell them that I gave up and you didn't. Now bring that aircraft home." That's not an order. That's a request from a grateful old man. At 4:11, Evelyn Carter began her approach to the divert field, and her aircraft chose that moment to remind her that it was dying. The warning lights that had gone quiet during the refueling came screaming back to life. The one good engine, the engine that had carried her out of the canyon and through the glide and up to the tanker, began to run rough. And Evelyn understood, with the cold clarity that had gotten her through the whole night, that the aircraft had given her everything it had, and it was almost out of everything. It had held together through the canyon, through hundreds of hits, through a dead engine and a glide and a dive, through all of it because it had a job to do. And now the job was almost done, and the old warhorse was finally, quietly, starting to fail. "Divert field, this is Wraith 1, she called. "I'm inbound with battle damage. My left engine's already gone, and my right is running rough. I'm going to need to bring her in on the first try, because I don't think she's got a go-around left in her. Please have emergency vehicles standing by. Wraith 1, this is the tower. We've been briefed on you, ma'am. We've been watching your whole flight. Everybody here knows what you did tonight. We've got the whole field ready for you. Fire, medical, everything. You just fly the airplane. We'll take care of the rest. Bring her home. And Evelyn flew the airplane. She babied the dying engine, coaxing just enough power out of it to hold her glide path, nursing the wounded aircraft down toward the runway inch by careful inch. The engine coughed. The controls felt heavy and wrong. Somewhere in the airframe, something was tearing loose. She could feel it, a shudder that hadn't been there before. But she held the aircraft steady, and she brought it down, and she talked to it the whole way, the way she talked to Doyle, low and calm and certain. Come on, sweetheart. You've done everything I've ever asked of you tonight. Everything. Just give me this one last thing. Just get us on the ground. That's all. One more mile, one more minute. Come on, old girl, bring us home. And the aircraft, as if it heard her, as if it understood, held together for one more mile, one more minute. The runway rose up to meet her. The wheels reached down, and at 4:16 in the morning, after everything, after the canyon and the cannon and the dead engine and the glitter and the beam and the tanker, the wheels of Major Evelyn Carter's battered A-10 Thunderbolt touched down on solid ground, and the aircraft rolled to a stop, and it was over. For a moment, Evelyn didn't move. She sat in the cockpit of the aircraft that had carried her through the impossible, and she put both hands flat against the instrument panel, and she said very quietly, so quietly that no radio picked it up, "Thank you. Thank you for not letting me down." And then she let her head fall back against the seat, and she closed her eyes and she felt, for the first time in over 2 hours, the ground underneath her. The right engine chose that moment to quit for good. It sputtered, coughed, and died out of fuel, out of life. Its work finally finished. And Evelyn actually laughed, an exhausted, disbelieving laugh, because the aircraft had held on for exactly as long as she needed it, and not 1 second longer. It had waited until her wheels were down and her rollout was done. And then it had let go. At 4:19, they got her out of the cockpit, and Evelyn Carter's legs almost didn't hold her. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft, and hands reached up to help her down the ladder. And when her boots hit the tarmac, her knees buckled, and 2 crew chiefs caught her under the arms and held her up. She was shaking now, really shaking, the adrenaline finally draining out of her all at once, and she leaned against those strangers and let them hold her weight, and she looked back up at her aircraft in the floodlights. And what she saw stopped her heart. The Warthog was destroyed, not the way an aircraft looks after a hard mission. Destroyed, the fuselage was riddled with holes, hundreds of them, punched through the skin from every angle. One engine was blackened and torn. A section of one wing was shredded. The tail was chewed nearly in half. It looked less like an aircraft that had flown home and more like a piece of scrap that had been dragged out of a war. And Evelyn stood there, held up by 2 strangers, and stared at it, and understood, really understood for the first time, what she had flown through, what she had survived, what that ugly, faithful, magnificent machine had absorbed to keep her alive. "Ma'am?" One of the crew chiefs, a young airman, was staring at the aircraft too, and his voice was full of something close to reverence. "Ma'am, I've been working these birds for 6 years. I have never in my life seen one come home looking like this. There's no way this thing should have flown. There's no way. How are you standing here right now?" And Evelyn looked at the young airman, and then she looked back at the aircraft that had refused to die, and she said the only thing that felt true. "She didn't do it for me, son. She did it for the men in that canyon. Same as me, Wamton. Neither one of us was willing to leave them. That's all. That's the whole story." At 4:31, in a small ready room at the divert field, Evelyn finally got the news she'd been afraid to ask for. She was sitting with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, still in her flight suit, when the phone on the wall rang and someone answered it and then held it out to her. "Major Carter, it's for you. It's the command center at Eglin. It's Colonel Reynolds." She took the phone. "Mike?" "Evelyn." And she could hear the smile in his voice before he even said it. "I've got a report from the medical facility. The 2 wounded soldiers, the ones Doyle carried out." A pause just long enough to make her heart stop. "They're both going to make it. Both of them. The docs say they were close, real close, but they're stable now. They're going to live. All 9 men who were in that canyon are alive and safe and accounted for. Every single one, Evelyn. You didn't lose anybody, not one. And Major Evelyn Carter, who had flown a canyon and shielded 9 men, and disobeyed a general and dove a dead aircraft through the night and come home in a wreck that should have killed her, finally broke. She put the phone down against her shoulder, and she covered her face with her free hand, and she cried. Not the quiet tears from the cockpit, real crying, the deep, shaking, cleansing kind, the kind that comes when a burden you've been carrying for hours is suddenly, finally set down. She cried for the fear she hadn't let herself feel. She cried for the men who'd been so close to death. She cried out of relief and exhaustion and gratitude and the sheer overwhelming weight of the night. And on the other end of the line, Colonel Reynolds didn't say anything. He just stayed there, quiet, letting his friend cry because he understood that she'd been striving for everybody else all night long. And now, finally, she got to be something other than strong. When she could speak again, she wiped her eyes and picked the phone back up. Mike, the 2 who were hurt, do you have their names? I do. I want them. And I want the names of all 9, every man in that canyon. I want to know who they are. Because tonight I flew for people I'd never met, and I told them things over a radio, and I made them promises, and I need to know their names now. They're not going to be voices in the dark to me. Not after tonight. Reynolds' voice was thick. I'll get you every name, Evelyn, I promise. At 4:48, there was a commotion outside the ready room, and someone came to the door, and what they said made Evelyn stand up so fast she knocked over her cold coffee. Major Carter, there's a helicopter inbound. It's the medevac bird from the extraction. They're diverting here to refuel before they continue to the main hospital. Ma'am, the soldiers from the canyon are on board. They're landing here in about 10 minutes. And there's a young sergeant on the radio he's asking if the pilot is here. He says his name is Doyle. He says you 2 have a deal. Evelyn was already moving. She was out the door and across the tarmac before the airman finished speaking, out into the cold pre-dawn dark. And she stood at the edge of the landing pad and she watched the sky, and her heart was pounding harder than it had pounded all night. Harder than the canyon. Harder than the dive. Because in a few minutes she was going to meet them. The men she'd flown for. The men she'd bled her aircraft dry for. The men who were alive because she'd refused to leave. She saw the helicopter's lights first, coming in low out of the dark, and then she heard it, and then it was there, settling down onto the pad, and the doors were opening and medical personnel were rushing forward with stretchers. And Evelyn stood back and let them work, because the wounded came first, always. And she watched as they carefully lifted 2 men out of the helicopter and onto stretchers. 2 men who were pale and bandaged, but alive. And one of them turned his head as they carried him past her, and his eyes found her, and he knew. He knew who she was. Somehow he just knew. You're her, the wounded soldier whispered as they carried him past. You're the pilot. You're the one who was up there. Evelyn stepped forward and walked alongside the stretcher for a few paces, and she reached down and took his hand, and she held it. I'm the one who was up there, she said softly. And you're the one who kept asking if I was still with you, aren't you? Tears ran down the young man's face. I felt you, he said. The whole time, every time it got bad, I heard you up there, and I knew I was going to be okay. You never left. You said you wouldn't leave, and you never did. I never will, Evelyn said, and she squeezed his hand. You hear me? Not tonight, not ever. Now you go with these good people, and you let them fix you up. And when you're better, you come find me, because I want to know your name, and I want to know your family, and I want to know everything about the man I met tonight in the dark. And then they carried him on toward the waiting ambulance, and Evelyn watched him go, and she was so caught up in it that she almost didn't notice the last man climbing down out of the helicopter. The one who wasn't on a stretcher, the one who stood there for a moment, looking around the tarmac until his eyes landed on her, and then he went completely still. He was young, younger than she'd imagined, dirty and exhausted and still in his gear, with a 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd been to hell and back in the last few hours. And Evelyn knew, the second she saw his face, exactly who he was. Sergeant Doyle, she said. He didn't answer. He just started walking toward her, slowly at first, and then faster, and his face was crumbling, and by the time he reached her, he could barely see through his tears. He stopped in front of her, This young man who had held 9 lives together at the bottom of a canyon, who had thrown strobes toward machine guns because a voice on the radio asked him to, who had refused to board a helicopter until he knew she was safe. He stopped in front of her, and he opened his mouth, and no words came out. And Evelyn Carter smiled at him, this gentle, exhausted, radiant smile, and she held out her hand. "We had a deal," she said quietly. "You and me, when it was all over, we'd shake hands." Doyle looked down at her offered hand, and then he looked back up at her face. And then he did something that broke the composure of every hardened soldier and airman standing on that tarmac. He ignored the handshake completely, and he stepped forward, and he wrapped his arms around her, and he held on to her like a drowning man holds on to the thing that saves him, and he wept into her shoulder. "Thank you," he choked out. Thank you. I thought we were going to die in there. I thought I was going to have to watch my guys die, and there was nothing I could do. And then you came. Everybody said nobody was coming, and then you came. You flew into a place 3 pilots said was impossible. You almost died for us. You almost died." He pulled back and looked at her, his face streaked and raw. Wait. Why would you do that? For people you never even met?" And Evelyn Carter held the young sergeant by the shoulders, and she looked him in the eyes, and she told him the truth she had carried for 9 years. The truth that had put her in that cockpit tonight. The truth that had made the whole impossible thing possible. "Because a long time ago," she said, "I was you. I was at the bottom of a valley surrounded with wounded men praying somebody would come. And everybody said it was too dangerous. And then a pilot came anyway. I never knew his name. I never got to thank him, but he saved my life, and he made me who I am, and every day since I promised myself that if I was ever the one flying, and somebody was down there in the dark praying for help, I would come, no matter what. I would not leave them the way I was almost left." Her voice broke. "So you don't have to thank me, Sergeant Doyle. Tonight wasn't me doing you a favor. Tonight was me keeping a promise I made a very long time ago. You gave me the chance to finally keep it. And for that, I think maybe I should be thanking you." Doyle stared at her, and then slowly he wiped his face and he straightened up, and he did the thing he'd come to do. He took her hand in his and he shook it, firmly, the way you shake the hand of someone you will remember for the rest of your life. "It's an honor to know you, Major Carter," he said. "The honor's mine, Sergeant," she answered. "It always was." And the sun was just beginning to come up over the divert field, the first gray light of a new day, and the two of them stood there on the tarmac holding on to that handshake a little longer than they needed to. A pilot and a soldier who had found each other in the dark over the mountains of Afghanistan. Both of them alive, both of them home, both of them changed forever by a single impossible night. The investigation began 3 days later, and Evelyn Carter walked into that room fully expecting it to be the end of her career. She had not slept much. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the canyon, back in the glide, back on that boom in the dark. But she had made her peace with whatever was coming. She had disobeyed a direct order. She had destroyed a multi-million-dollar aircraft. She had flown a profile that no regulation in the world would ever sanction. And she had done all of it knowingly with her eyes wide open, and she was not going to stand in front of that board and pretend otherwise. The room was full of senior officers, faces she didn't know, men and women whose job it was to look at what she'd done and decide whether it was heroism or recklessness. And they did not look friendly. A colonel she'd never met opened a thick folder and began to read the charges, one after another, a long, cold list of every rule she'd broken, every line she'd crossed, and with each one, Evelyn felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders. "Major Carter," the colonel said when he'd finished reading, "these are serious findings. You took an aircraft into terrain that our own flight manuals classify as non-survivable. You continued to engage after sustaining critical damage, and you disobeyed a direct, explicit order from your commanding general to break off. Do you dispute any of these facts?" "No, sir," Evelyn said. "I don't dispute any of them. Every word you just read is true." The colonel looked up, surprised. "You're not going to defend yourself?" "I'm going to tell you the truth, sir, that's all. I did every single thing on that list. I knew the terrain was dangerous. I knew the damage was serious. And I heard the general's order to break off as clearly as I hear you right now. I disobeyed it. Not because I panicked, not because I lost my head, but because I made a choice. There were 9 men in that canyon who were going to die if I left, And I decided I wasn't going to let that happen while I still had an aircraft in the air and fuel in my tanks. If that decision was wrong, then I was wrong, and I'll accept whatever this board decides. But I won't stand here and tell you I'd do it differently, because I wouldn't. I'd fly that canyon again tonight if the same 9 men were down there. The room was silent, and the colonel looked down at his folder, and he seemed almost at a loss for what to say next. And that was when the door at the back of the room opened, and General Aldous Prescott walked in. He wasn't scheduled to be there. Nobody had expected him, and every officer in the room came to attention as he crossed the floor, and the colonel running the investigation actually stood up. "General, we didn't, sir. This is an ongoing review. I'm not sure." "I'm aware of what this is, Colonel," Prescott said. "I'm the one who convened it, and I'm here to give testimony, if that's permitted." The colonel blinked. "You want to testify, sir?" "I do." Prescott walked to the front of the room, and he turned, and he faced the board, and he did not sit down. He stood, the way Evelyn had stood, and he looked at the officers who were about to decide her fate, and he began to speak. 3 nights ago, I walked into a command center at 2 in the morning, and I made a decision. I looked at a map, and I looked at a canyon, and I listened to 3 experienced pilots tell me it couldn't be flown. And I decided that 11 American soldiers were already dead. I was ready to write their names on a casualty list and go back to bed. I want that in the record. I want it written down that the commanding general gave up. The room had gone completely still. And then, Prescott continued, a pilot in the back of my room, a pilot I'd never met, stood up and told me I was wrong. She told me there was a way to fly that canyon that no one had tried. And I let her go, and I'll be honest with you, I let her go half expecting to lose her. And then I watched for 2 hours as that woman did things with an aircraft that I did not believe were possible. I watched her destroy a machine gun position that had 9 men pinned down. I watched her take out a rocket team that was seconds from killing her. I watched her fly so low over enemy fighters that they threw themselves into the dirt. And I watched her use their fear, to open a path for those men to escape. Prescott's voice was getting rougher now, but he didn't stop. And then I watched her run out of fuel, and I watched her aircraft take a hit that killed one of her engines. And when I saw that, when I understood she was flying a dying aircraft on empty tanks, I gave the order that this board is holding against her. I ordered her to break off. I ordered her to save her own life. And do you know why I gave that order? He looked around the room. Not because it was tactically correct. I gave it because I could not stand the thought of listening to her die on my radio. It was a human order, a selfish one, maybe, and Major Carter disobeyed it. She flew back into that canyon, and she put her aircraft between the enemy and those 9 men, and she shielded them with her own body until every last one of them was clear. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was very quiet. "You want to punish her for disobeying my order. I understand the impulse. Orders matter. Discipline matters. But I am standing here to tell you something, and I want every person in this room to hear it. If Major Carter had obeyed my order that night, 9 men would be dead. 9 families would be planning funerals right now instead of picking their sons up from the hospital. She was right, and I was wrong, and the only reason those men are alive is that she had the courage to know the difference in the moment when it mattered." He straightened. "So if this board wants to discipline someone for the events of that night, then discipline me. I'm the one who gave up. I'm the one who was ready to leave them. Major Carter is the one who saved them. And if you punish her for that, then you are telling every pilot in this Air Force that the right thing to do is to let people die when the regulations say it's too hard to save them. And I did not spend 30 years in this uniform to send that message." He looked at Evelyn then for the first time since he'd entered the room, and something passed between them, something that didn't need words. "That's my testimony," Prescott said. "Do with it what you will." At the 6-week mark, the board delivered its findings, and Evelyn Carter's career was not over. It was transformed. The investigation concluded that while Major Carter had indeed operated far outside standard procedure, her actions were not reckless but calculated, driven at every step by the single goal of preserving human life. Her decision to disobey the order to break off was noted formally in her record, but it was noted alongside the testimony of the commanding general who had given that order and who had stood before the board and declared that the order itself had been a mistake. And in the end, the finding was not one of misconduct. It was something else entirely. It was a recommendation that the tactics Evelyn had improvised that night, the terrain following canyon approach, the use of the aircraft as a psychological weapon, the willingness to become a living shield, be studied formally, so that other pilots facing other impossible canyons might have a chance where before there was none. Evelyn Carter had gone into that canyon to break the rules, and she came out of it having rewritten them. But that was not the part of the story that mattered most to her. Not really. The medals came eventually, and she accepted them with grace, and she meant it when she said the credit belonged to her aircraft and the men on the ground and the tanker crew who flew through a storm to reach her. The recognition was nice, but it was not what she carried with her. What she carried with her were the names. Reynolds had gotten them for her, just as he'd promised. All 9. And Evelyn had learned every one of them by heart. She knew who they were now. She knew that the young man who'd kept asking if she was still up there was named Ellis, 22 years old, with a baby daughter he'd never held because she'd been born while he was deployed. She knew that the other wounded man was named Reyes, who'd thrown himself over Ellis when the shooting started and taken shrapnel meant for his friend. She knew all of them, and she visited them in the hospital, every single one, and she sat by their beds, and she listened to their stories, and she stopped being a voice in the dark and became a person to them, and they became people to her. And Sergeant Doyle, well, Doyle became something more than that. At the 4-month mark on a quiet Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on the door of Evelyn Carter's home, and when she opened it, Sergeant Doyle was standing there, out of uniform, in a plain shirt and jeans, holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Sergeant," Evelyn said, and her whole face lit up. "What are you—" "Ma'am?" Doyle looked nervous, the way a young man looks when he's about to say something that matters. "I know I probably should have called first, but I've been trying to figure out how to do this for months now, and I finally just decided I had to do it in person." He took a breath. "This is my son, Michael. I named him after my grandfather. But ma'am, the thing is," he knelt down next to the little boy. "Michael, this is the lady I told you about. This is the pilot. This is the one who brought Daddy home." The little boy looked up at Evelyn with bright, serious eyes. And then, in the way that only small children shout to him, he said exactly what he was thinking. "Are you the angel? Daddy said an angel came in a plane and saved him. Are you the angel?" Evelyn Carter, who had flown through cannon fire and dove a dead aircraft through the night and stood before a board of officers ready to end her career, felt her composure crumble at the words of a 5-year-old boy. She knelt down in her doorway so that she was at his eye level, and she smiled at him, and her eyes were wet. "I'm not an angel, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm just a pilot. But your daddy is a hero. Do you know that? When everything was scary and dark, your daddy took care of 8 other men. He didn't leave a single one of them. He's the bravest person I've ever met, and I only got to bring him home because he was brave enough to hold on until I got there. So really, your daddy brought himself home. I just helped a little." The little boy considered this very seriously, and then he let go of his father's hand, and he stepped forward, and he wrapped his small arms around Evelyn's neck and hugged her, and he whispered, "Thank you for helping my daddy." And Evelyn Carter held that little boy in her doorway and could not speak at all. When she finally looked up, Doyle was crying too, standing there watching his son embrace the woman who'd saved his life. "I wanted him to meet you," Doyle said, his voice thick. "I wanted him to know your face, because someday when he's old enough to understand all of it, I want to be able to tell him that he met you, that the reason he still has a father is because a person he shook hands with once decided that some things are worth flying into hell for." He wiped his eyes. "You gave me my whole life back, Major. Every birthday I get to see. Every one of his. Every single day I get with my boy. That's yours. You gave me that." Evelyn stood up, still holding the little boy's hand, and she looked at Doyle and she shook her head slowly. "No, Sergeant," she said. "I didn't give you anything. I just made sure you got to keep what was already yours. There's a difference. What you do with all those days, all those birthdays, that's the gift. And it's not mine to give. It's yours to live." She squeezed his hand. "So go live it. Go hold your boy. Go be the father you fought so hard to come home to. That's how you thank me, not with words, by living every single one of those days like it matters. Because it does. It cost a lot. So make it count." They stayed for the whole afternoon, and it became the first of many. Because that is the thing that nobody tells you about a night like the one over that canyon. It doesn't end when the aircraft lands. The people you save don't disappear back into the dark. They become part of your life, and you become part of theirs. And the thread that connects you gets stronger with every year that passes. Doyle and his family came for Sunday dinners. Ellis, once he'd recovered, brought his baby daughter to meet the pilot who'd kept her father alive. And Evelyn held that baby and understood, in a way she never had before, exactly what she'd been fighting for up there in the dark. Not abstract soldiers, not names on a list, fathers, sons, whole futures, waiting to be lived. At the 1-year mark, Major Evelyn Carter stood in front of a room full of young pilots, brand new to the A-10, and she told them the story. Not the version with the medals, the real one. And when she finished, one of the young pilots, a woman not much younger than Evelyn had been that night, raised her hand and asked the question that every one of them was thinking. Ma'am, when you flew into that canyon, when 3 pilots and a general all said it couldn't be done, weren't you afraid? And Evelyn Carter looked out at all those young faces, all those pilots who would someday face their own impossible canyons, and she gave them the truest answer she had. I was terrified, she said. I want you to hear me say that, because there's a myth out there that courage means not being afraid, and that myth gets people killed. I was afraid the entire time. I was afraid at the mouth of that canyon, and I was afraid on every pass. And I was afraid when my engine died, and I was afraid on that boom in the dark. The fear never went away. Not once, she paused. But here's what I learned that night, and it's the only thing I really came here to teach you. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is just the tax you pay for caring about the outcome. The moment you stop being afraid is the moment you've stopped caring. And a pilot who stopped caring is more dangerous than any canyon. So don't wait to stop being afraid. You'll wait forever. Feel the fear. Understand exactly what it's telling you, and then do the right thing anyway. That's not the absence of fear. That's what courage actually is. It's fear plus a decision. She let that settle. And then she said the last thing, the thing she wanted them to carry with them out of that room and into every cockpit they'd ever sit in. There are going to be times in your career when everyone around you says something can't be done, when the map says impossible, when the experienced people all shake their heads, and most of the time they'll be right, and you should listen to them. But every once in a while, there are going to be people down there in the dark, people who are out of time and out of options, people whose only hope is that somebody looks at the same impossible thing everyone else looked at and sees it differently. And on that day, I need you to remember something. Her voice was steady and strong, and it filled the whole room. History doesn't remember the people who accepted what everyone said was possible. History remembers the person who was willing to fly lower than anyone else ever dared, not because they were fearless, because they decided that certain people were worth it. So when your canyon comes, and it will come, you look at it and you understand the danger completely, and then you go. You go get them, because someone somewhere is down in that dark praying that you're the kind of pilot who comes. The room was silent, and then one by one those young pilots rose to their feet, and they stood, and they did not stop. Major Evelyn Carter never told them the last part. She never told them that 9 years before that canyon, she had been the one in the dark, praying. She never told them about the pilot who came for her, the one whose name she never learned, the one who flew so low she could see the number under his wing. She kept that part to herself because some debts you don't repay by talking about them. You repay them by becoming the person who pays them forward. And she had. On one impossible night, in one impossible canyon, she had finally, fully become the pilot who came. The A-10 she flew that night never flew again. It was too badly damaged to repair, but the Air Force did not scrap it. Instead, they cleaned it up, patched the worst of the holes just enough to make it whole, and they put it on display with a plaque that told the story of the night it carried a pilot through the impossible and brought 9 men home. And to this day, young airmen walk past it, and they stop, and they read the plaque, and they look up at the ugly, magnificent, battle-scarred aircraft, and they understand that it is not the fast or the beautiful machines that change history. It is the ones that refuse to leave, just like the pilots who fly them. Evelyn Carter served for many more years. She trained hundreds of pilots. She never sought the spotlight, and she never told the story to make herself look brave. only to make the next generation understand what the job really was. And when people asked her, as they always did, how she'd found the courage to do what she did that night, she always gave the same answer, the same one every time, right up until the end of her career. I didn't find courage, she would say. I just refused to leave people in the dark. That's all courage ever really is. It's love, refusing to quit. And somewhere out there, scattered across the country, 9 men who were supposed to die in a canyon in Afghanistan grew old. They raised their children. They held their grandchildren. They lived thousands of ordinary, precious days that they were never supposed to have. And every single one of them knew exactly why. Because on the worst night of their lives, when the whole world said it couldn't be done, when 3 pilots turned away and a general gave up, one person looked at the impossible and decided they were worth saving. One person flew lower than anyone ever dared, and she brought them home. Her name was Major Evelyn Carter, and she never, not once in her entire life, left anyone waiting in the dark. There was one question that Evelyn Carter carried with her for her whole life, and for a long time she believed she would carry it to her grave. Who was the pilot who came for her? 9 years before that canyon, before the medals, before the little boy who called her an angel, before any of it, she had been a young lieutenant pinned in a valley with wounded men and a radio that kept saying help was too far away. And then a pilot came who was told not to, and she had spent almost a decade wondering about him, wondering if he was still alive, wondering if he knew that the frightened young officer he'd saved had grown up to fly the same ugly aircraft, chase the same impossible odds, keep the same stubborn promise he'd kept for her. She never expected to find him. Some debts you just carry. But life has a way of closing circles when you least expect it, and Evelyn's circle closed on an ordinary afternoon in the last place she would have looked. It happened at a retirement ceremony, not hers. She was a full colonel by then, invited to speak at the farewell of an old master sergeant she'd worked with for years. She almost didn't go. She was tired that week, worn down by paperwork and the long, slow grind that even a legend's career eventually becomes. But she'd made a promise to be there, and Evelyn Carter did not break promises, not even the small ones. So she put on her dress uniform and she went. And that was where she met the old man. He was sitting off to the side of the reception afterward, in a wheelchair, a blanket over his knees, watching the room with the quiet, faded eyes of someone who had once been at the center of everything and was now content to sit at the edge and remember. He wore no uniform, just a cardigan and a pair of old glasses. But there was something about him, something in the way he watched the pilots move through the room that made Evelyn stop. An aide leaned over to her and said quietly, "That's Mr. Holloway, retired well over a decade ago. A 10 driver back in the day, one of the old ones. He doesn't come to many of these anymore. His daughter brings him when he's up to it." Evelyn didn't know why, but she crossed the room and she pulled up a chair and she sat down next to the old man. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "my name's Evelyn Carter. I hear you flew warthogs." The old man's face creased into a slow smile. "A long time ago, young lady. A long, long time ago. Before your time, I'd wager." "Not as much as you'd think," Evelyn said. "I fly them too. Or I did. Mostly I sit at a desk now and tell young people how to do it better than I did." Holloway laughed, a dry, delighted sound. "Oh, that's the whole job at the end, isn't it? You spend your youth doing the impossible and your old age trying to explain it to people who don't believe you." His eyes twinkled. "Did you have a good run? In the airplane?" "I did," Evelyn said softly. "I had one night I'll never forget. A canyon, a rescue that everyone said couldn't be done." Holloway nodded slowly, the way old pilots nod when they recognize something in another pilot, some shared thing that doesn't need to be spelled out. "The ones you can't do," he said, "those are the only ones worth remembering. Everybody remembers the missions where they were told no." He looked at her more closely now. "You went anyway. I can see it on you. You've got the look of someone who went when they were told no." "I did," Evelyn admitted. And then, because there was something about this old man that made her want to tell him, she said the thing she almost never said out loud. "But I only went because a long time ago, somebody went for me, before I ever flew. I was a lieutenant on the ground, pinned down, and I called for help, and everyone said it was too dangerous. And a pilot came anyway, flew so low over us I could read the number under his wing. Stayed until we were all clear and flew home on fumes. I never knew his name. I became a pilot because of him. And I chose the A-10 because that's what he was flying. She paused. I've spent 9 years wishing I could thank him. But you don't get to thank ghosts. So I just tried to become him instead, for somebody else. The old man had gone very still. Evelyn didn't notice at first. She was looking down at her hands, lost in the memory. But when she looked back up, something in Holloway's face had changed. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, and his hands, folded on the blanket over his knees, had begun to tremble. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "are you all right? Can I get you something?" "What valley?" the old man whispered. Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The valley." His voice was shaking now. "The one you were pinned in, as a lieutenant. What year? Where?" And Evelyn told him. The year, the place, the valley with the name that most people had never heard and never would. The old man closed his eyes, and for a long moment he did not speak at all. When he opened them again, they were wet, and his voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a breath. "There was a convoy," he said slowly, "pinned in a bowl at the bottom of that valley. Wounded men, and command kept telling them to hold, that the nearest asset was too far, that the terrain was too tight for a safe approach." He swallowed. "I was flying a training rotation. I wasn't even supposed to be in that airspace. But I heard the call on the radio, and I heard a young voice, an officer, trying to keep everybody calm while the whole world came apart around them. And I just couldn't leave that voice out there alone." Evelyn had stopped breathing. "I flew in low," Holloway went on, "lower than the book allowed. Everybody said don't. I went anyway. I stayed until the last vehicle rolled out of that bowl. And then I flew home on fumes, and I caught hell for it afterward, and I never regretted it for one single day of my life." He looked at her, and the tears were running freely down his old face now. "I never knew what happened to that young officer. I never knew if it was worth it. You don't, you know. You fly in, you do the thing, you fly out, and then they're just gone. Voices in the dark. You never find out." The room around them had faded away completely. There was only the old man and Evelyn, in 9 years, in a valley, in a circle that was closing after all this time. "Lieutenant," Holloway whispered, "that voice on the radio, that young officer I flew for." He reached out with a trembling hand. "Was it you?" And Evelyn Carter, Colonel, legend, the pilot who flew the impossible canyon, the woman who had stood before a board of officers and refused to bend, came completely undone. She took the old man's trembling hand in both of hers, and she pressed it to her cheek, and she could not speak, because there were no words. There had never been words for this. There were only 9 years of wondering suddenly answered in a single unbearable moment. "It was me," she finally choked out. "It was me. I'm the one. I'm the lieutenant from the valley. I'm alive because of you. I've been alive for 9 years because of you, and I never knew your name, and I flew into that canyon. I flew into hell for 9 other men because you taught me how, because you came for me first." She was sobbing now, this hardened combat pilot, weeping openly in a reception hall in her dress uniform. "I've wanted to thank you my whole life, and I never thought I'd get to. I never thought I'd find you." The old man was crying too, gripping her hand with a strength that surprised her. This frail man in a wheelchair who had once flown lower than anyone dared. "You grew up," he whispered, the scared young voice on my radio. "You grew up and you became a pilot, and you flew the same airplane and you did the same impossible thing for somebody else." He shook his head in wonder. "Do you know what that means to an old man? Do you have any idea? I spent 40 years of wondering if any of it mattered. If flying in when they said no ever actually changed anything. And here you are. Here you are telling me that the thing I did in one valley became the thing you did in one canyon. And that 9 more men are alive now because of one afternoon I almost talked myself out of. My God, girl, you're the answer to a question I gave up asking a long time ago." They sat there together for a long time, the two of them, hand in hand, and the reception went on around them, and neither one of them noticed. And when Evelyn could finally speak again, she said the thing that had been waiting in her chest for 9 years. "I need you to know something," she said. "Every man I ever saved, every pilot I ever trained who went on to save somebody else, every life that got a little longer because I did the job the way you taught me to do it without ever knowing your name, all of it traces back to you, To one afternoon when you heard a scared voice on a radio and decided that voice was worth flying into a valley for. You didn't just save one lieutenant that day, Mr. Holloway. You started something. You started a chain, and it never stopped, and it's still going, and there are children alive right now. There's a little boy who calls me an angel. There are babies who have fathers, all because of a thing you did before I ever sat in a cockpit. Her voice broke. You have to know that. You have to. Because you sat here for 40 years wondering if it mattered. And I am here to tell you it mattered more than you will ever be able to count. The old man closed his eyes, and the tears streamed down, and he said, in a voice full of a peace that seemed to reach all the way back through his whole life, then it was worth it. Every bit of it. The hell I caught, the risks, all of it. It was worth it. He opened his eyes and looked at her, because I got to sit in a chair at the end of my life and hold the hand of the person I saved, and find out she spent her whole life doing the same thing I did. There is no medal in the world worth this. None. This is the only thing I ever really wanted to know, and I got to find out. Evelyn stayed with him the entire afternoon. His daughter came over, worried at first to find her father crying, and then, when she understood, she cried too. Evelyn told them the whole story. The canyon, the 9 men, Doyle, the little boy, Ellis and his daughter. And Holloway listened to all of it with shining eyes, and every so often he would shake his head and murmur, "You flew it lower than they did. Of course you did. Of course you did." And there was so much pride in his voice that it broke Evelyn's heart clean in half. Before she left, she knelt down beside his wheelchair and she took both his hands one more time. "I'm going to come back," she said. "I'm going to come back and visit you, and I'm going to bring the men I saved, because they need to meet you. They need to know where it started. And I'm going to bring my young pilots, the ones I train, and I'm going to sit them down in front of you, and I'm going to say, this is the man. This is where all of it comes from. This is the pilot who flew into a valley when everyone said no, and everything good I ever did in the air, I learned from him." Her voice trembled. "Is that all right? Can I do that?" The old man smiled, and it was the smile of a man whose life had just been made complete. "I would like that," he said softly. "I would like that more than anything in the world." And she did. Over the next 2 years, until the old man passed quietly in his sleep, Evelyn Carter came back again and again. She brought Doyle, who wept and shook the old pilot's hand and said, "Thank you for starting the thing that ended with my life being saved." She brought Ellis and his daughter, now a bright, laughing little girl, who climbed up into the old man's lap without being asked and hugged him because children always seem to know. She brought her young pilots, one class after another, and she sat them down in front of Holloway, and she told them the truth. That courage is not a thing you invent. It's a thing you inherit. Somebody flies into the dark for you, and then you spend the rest of your life flying into the dark for somebody else. And that is how it goes, on, one pilot to the next, one act of refusing to leave passed down like a flame that never goes out. When Holloway finally died, Evelyn spoke at his funeral. The chapel was full of pilots, young and old, most of whom had never met the man, but all of whom had heard the story because Evelyn had made sure of it. She stood at the front in her dress uniform, and she looked out at all of them, and she said the things she had come to understand over a whole lifetime in the air. "A long time ago," she said, "this man flew into a valley he was told not to fly into to save a scared young lieutenant he'd never met. He never knew if it mattered. He carried that question for 40 years. And near the end of his life, he got to find out. He got to find out that the one thing he did that day became 1,000 things. That the life he saved went on to save 9 more. And those 9 went on to raise children. And those children will go on to do things we'll never see. And all of it, every bit of it, started with one man deciding that a stranger's life was worth the risk." She paused, and her voice was strong and clear, and it filled the whole chapel. "Most of us will never know the full weight of the good we do. We do the thing, and we fly on, and we never find out where the ripples go. But I stand here today as living proof of something. I am proof that the kindness you show, the risk you take, the person you refuse to leave behind, it does not stop with them. It never stops. It goes on, further than you will ever be able to see. This man saved one life, and that one life is why 9 men grew old. That is the arithmetic of a single act of courage. That is what one person flying lower than anyone dared can set in motion." She looked down at the flag-draped casket, and her eyes filled, and she said the last thing, the thing that was really just for him. You asked me once if it was worth it, so let me answer you one final time, my friend. Every life you touched is still touching other lives right now, this very moment, in ways neither of us will ever fully know. You didn't just save me in that valley. You lit something that is still burning, and it will keep burning long after both of us are gone, carried forward by pilots not yet born, in aircraft not yet built, over canyons not yet mapped. That is your legacy, not one rescue, a chain of them stretching into a future you'll never see. So rest now. You've earned it 1,000 times over, and know that the flame you lit will never, ever go out. I'll see to that myself, I promise you. And you know by now that I don't break promises. Colonel Evelyn Carter kept that promise the way she kept all of them for the rest of her days. She flew until they wouldn't let her fly anymore. And then she taught, and then, when she was old herself, she sat in reception halls and told the story to anyone who would listen. The story of the pilot who came for her and the canyon she flew for 9 others, and the circle that closed on an ordinary afternoon and turned out to be the most extraordinary thing of all. And every young pilot who ever heard it walked away carrying the same flame, the same stubborn refusal, the same understanding that had been passed down from one dark valley to one impossible canyon and onward into a future without end. Because that is the truth that outlasts every medal and every mission. Courage is not something you keep. It is something you pass on. And the greatest thing a person can ever do is fly into the dark for a stranger and trust that someday, somewhere, that stranger will grow up and do the same for someone else. Evelyn Carter did. Holloway did. And because they did, 9 men grew old and children were born and a flame was lit that will never go out as long as there is one pilot left in the world who is willing to look at the impossible, understand it completely, and still choose to go. That is the whole story. And it is not finished. It will never be finished. Because somewhere out there right now, someone is in the dark, praying that help is coming. And somewhere out there right now, someone is deciding to come. That is how it has always been. That is how it will always be. One flame passed from hand to hand forever. And it started with a single pilot flying lower than anyone dared, refusing to leave one frightened soul behind.